Glenn, by the way, I was just now read. Did you hear those rockets apparently fired towards Israel about an hour ago? Not sure if you saw the reports. And I got a video of the rocket, the kind of the smoke behind it, and the trail of smoke behind it. And then, so I was pretty shocked. We posted about it, and then Channel 12 said no, there was no rocket. It was a false alarm. And then now journalists just told me as we're starting that there was a rocket, but it didn't land in Israel. So I don't know who fired it, whether it's firing it at Israeli soldiers in South Lebanon, that the territory they still hold. But that was a development that happened an hour ago, and I just got an update now that it seems a rocket was fired, but at Israeli soldiers in South Lebanon. Not sure if it was fired by Hezbollah or some lone wolf actor. But yeah, it's good to speak to you. It's been a while. A lot has happened other than this rocket that was just fired. And that's the ceasefire talks seem to be on edge. As you know, I'm always the optimist, and I've been saying for a while, I think the negotiations will go ahead. I think both sides will attend, even though Kushner and Witkoff, according to Axios, they're not heading to Pakistan yet, despite the reports. They actually went to Washington. Potentially, their plane is heading to Washington. That's Witkoff and Kushner. We have J.D. Vance is not going to be attending Pakistan at all, based on the latest reports, and Trump said that earlier as well. And there's been reports that Iran is saying they're not going to attend the negotiations. Now, I had a source tell me 2 hours ago saying, Mario, there's a plane from the negotiating team is already heading to Pakistan, just left. That was 2 hours ago. That's contradicted by all the other reports. Wall Street Journal just put out a report now a few minutes ago saying the delegation will not attend, the Iranian delegation will not attend unless the blockade is lifted. Now, I trust my source. I think that maybe that's a smaller delegation, maybe mediators on the Iranian side trying to make the meeting happen. So it could be a low-level delegation that's heading to Pakistan. We don't know. But and I'm pretty confident of the report that a plane is heading from Iran to Pakistan. But I'm still in the position that they will attend the talks, whether it's today, whether it's delayed by a day or two. These talks will happen. The ceasefire will not collapse. That's my position. You've been covering this a lot more than I. You do a lot of interviews as well. Where do you stand on all this?
Well, in terms of missiles being fired and who's attending, it's very hard to tell because of the fog of war, and there's so much being based on the narrative war as well. That is, Trump obviously wants to, always everything has to be spun as a victory. Everything is strength. So the American side has to spin it. The Iranian as well. They apparently had some criticism from within that they let Trump get away with too much stuff. Him making these big statements, and Iran has to be better to repudiate it. And so everyone's making this counterclaims, and so it can be hard to siphon out what is real and what is fake. But I agree with the assessment that both sides would like to put an end to this, because for the Americans, I think they exhausted themselves to a large extent. There's no good out of this war. They're not going to get the Iranians to capitulate, as the rhetoric would suggest. And I think also for Trump, I mean, this was a massive miscalculation. I think he was hoping for a short war. And same as the Iranians, they have suffered greatly. There's been a lot of destruction. Things that has to be rebuilt. Its economy has to be put back on track. So I agree with those aspects. The problem is that they're too far apart, I think. That is, Trump, he can't, everything has to be spun as a win. But it's very hard to sell a victory, given that the Strait of Hormuz will not be under US control, or at least not even released from Iranian control. And I think that's the main problem. And for the Iranians, they can't accept anything that would open the door for another attack. So I think they're too far apart. At best, I think maybe the ceasefire could be extended and they continue this scuttle back and forth. But the US escalating by putting a blockade on Iranian ports, I think this complicates matters much more.
Do you think there is a split within Iran? We're seeing a lot of indication of that. I'm not sure if you've been keeping up. When Arachi made a post saying the Strait of Hormuz is open, there was a lot of pushback from the Navy. There was a leak of them criticizing the post, saying they'll only listen to the supreme leader. Iranian TV was also very critical of Arachi's statement, saying he's been misled or something along those lines with the reopening of the strait, and it was closed not long after. there's that guy as well. What's his name? The new IRGC commander. I'm not sure if you remember his name. His name is, there it is, IRGC chief Ahmad Vahidi. And he's apparently the one calling the shots. Iran's new IRGC chief may be running his own foreign policy. While the Trump administration is pushing hard for a deal and claiming 100% leverage, some say Vahidi is deliberately stalling the negotiations from the inside. Vance is reportedly heading to the region soon. Oh, that's before I was copied yesterday. So meet Vahidi, the man who may actually decide whether Iran goes back to war. Not the president, not the parliament member. We're talking about the new IRGC chief. He has decades-long paper trail of bombings, assassination, proxy networks across the Middle East. So he's a lot more hardline than the executive branch of the Iranian government, the guys that we all talk about, that Trump talks about, Ghalibaf, Arachi, Pezeshkian, the president. I've been worried about a split within Iran for a while, and I'm worried we're seeing the cracks show. The IRGC still has control. They still have the most influence, but the cracks as in a disagreement, not saying there's a coup or mutiny, but there's disagreement between the executive branch that does not want to return to the war and the IRGC branch that may be more open for a prolonged conflict because they know they have the edge when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen the divisions to the extent it, I guess, causes a crisis within the leadership, but there are obviously divisions in terms of, or splits in terms of the approach moving forward, because some would like to reach for an agreement if something comes along which is acceptable. Others sees now that they finally have the US on the ropes after 47 years of crippling sanctions, invasion of their neighboring countries, all this killing of Iranian scientists. All of this, the US has been going after its society, military, economy for so many years. So now that they finally have an advantage, there's many who are not happy about the prospect of giving too much concessions. But I wouldn't. I so far haven't seen indications that it's gone over to the point where it will destabilize the government. Or
Agree.
We often
I haven't
find
seen that either. The IRGC they still call the shots. They have the weapons.
Yeah. Well, you often see this within all camps. If you look in the West, there's disagreements over, to what extent, what concessions should be accepted to end our war in Ukraine. The Americans as well. Some are arguing we should just pack up and leave Iran. It's not our problems. Others say, well, nothing short of regime change is acceptable. So you often find these splits. If anything, I think the split is much deeper in the United States now, especially among the America Firsters. What does America First mean? Does it mean, like Lindsey Graham suggests, that anyone who wants us harm, we should kill as many people as possible who want to do us harm? Or does it mean, get out of these forever wars? And, a lot of these divisions have profound there. I don't see the same yet in Iran, though.
Yeah, but do you think the IRGC, the guys calling the shots, do you think they're as pragmatic as we would want to believe? Do you really think they want to end the war? I think they're more pragmatic as some people make it out to be. Like, these guys are hardliners, bloodthirsty. They want to destroy the US, destroy Israel. Bullshit. They don't want war. They've been avoiding war. Their strategy of restraint is the reason they're in this mess in the first place. But do you think they know they have the upper hand now, Glenn? We both know the control of the Strait of Hormuz. Is Iran is the one that decides what happened in the Strait of Hormuz, or the US, obviously, if they want to blockade it. But do you think that they may overplay the hand and drag us back into war, not give any concessions whatsoever to Trump, not even some political concessions that are optically good to at least say Trump so he can say, I got a better deal than Obama, something? Now, worry they'll give him nothing.
Yeah, I often make that point. But first, I would just say pragmatism just means that you focus on what is achievable rather than your ideal outcome or what you could achieve in theory. So I think from this perspective, continuing the war isn't necessarily an absence of pragmatism. I think it's more, seeing it as a necessity. That is, if you do think that the United States will never accept a peace, whatever deal they sign with the Iranians, it will be temporary. to regroup and then look for a fight a different day. In other words, they will never learn to live with the Iranians. They will continue the goal of regime change. Then this is the ideal policy, probably. That is not just ideal, but it's also a possible policy, for the first time to really knock the U.S. down, not totally, but away from its dominant position in the Middle East. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is so important, by the way. And you already see some. I think I saw a report somewhere that the United Arab Emirates might consider selling oil in the Chinese yuan if it makes it easier to trade. They can decouple the whole petrodollar. They can get their reparations. If you want to rebuild Iran, you need the Strait of Hormuz so you can collect reparations. You can also pressure these Gulf states to reduce the presence of the Americans. You also see some talk about this, that perhaps the American presence provide more insecurity rather than security. So it's not just some pipe dream. If to hold on to the Strait of Hormuz, Iran can go from being a punching bag for America for the next few decades to becoming a regional power with its security intact. So there's a lot of good reasons to argue why Iran should keep this war going. That being said, I often, when I talk to Iranians as well, make the point, you don't want to humiliate the Americans in the Israelis too much either. I mean, these are two countries which base their security on global primacy and regional primacy. And if they're completely humiliated, this can make them do desperate things. You don't want to make a nuclear power too desperate, especially one with a kind of erratic leader like Trump. So it goes down to how great of a victory you actually want. But that being said as well, I do think a key problem is if Iran is winning, I'm reading the situation correctly, the problem is twofold. On the losing side, the United States, there will be desperation, and on the Iranian side, there would be hubris. They might take it too far, hit too many targets, want too many concessions from the US. I often make the point that this is the main risk also in the war we have in Ukraine. The losing side, NATO, you see desperation growing. The Europeans are escalating in ways which are, very, very dangerous, attacking, for example, Russia from their territory. While Russia, as it gets closer to victory, you might see hubris kick in, beginning to shoot down or attack some European targets. I don't know what they might do, but this is always, both sides are willing to take more risks, and I think this is a big problem now.
Two things. Number one, you talked about Trump being unstable. A lot of people are worried or talking about Trump considering a nuclear strike as a last resort. And, remember Tucker Carlson was up in arms, take away the nuclear codes from Trump. Like, do you think that's an actual risk? Now, I don't want to be seen like the person always defending Trump. I just think it's just not, look, the guy just ended the war. A war I've been very critical of. He's just forced Israel to accept the ceasefire. He's someone that had a quick in and out in Venezuela, and someone's trying to end the war in Ukraine. Not saying he did successfully, but at least he tried. He did more than Biden did. He did more in a week than Biden did in an entire administration to end the war in Ukraine. Not enough, but a lot. So, you can't just kind of talk about this person that's made all these decisions that could be considered rational in many cases. We signed a lot of bills like the psychedelics bill, Joe Rogan, like all these decisions that seem to be very good decisions for the US. But and then suddenly say, oh, he's going to use nuclear codes suddenly because he put out a few extreme posts. Maybe you disagree with me, but for me, it's just a clear madman theory of him trying to get Iran to concede, try to get Iran to think he's a madman and therefore accept an off-ramp and accept more concessions so he can get something out of this, that, a war that's not going well.
Well, that's the problem of the madman theory, though. If you act like you're crazy, like being Nixon's madman, the problem is, you don't know if he's playing the role or if he is actually mad. I mean, that's the whole point here. And you could be right. Maybe he's not as mad as he's often portrayed to be. He does seem, though, that it's been pushed in a corner, because I don't think what you're saying is necessarily contradictory. That is, if he wants ideally to take a different approach to American foreign policy. That is, on the wider scheme, he doesn't want the expensive empire. Doesn't mean that he's anti-imperialist or they want to get rid of American bases around the world. Just means he wants a greater return on investment. That if the empire is bleeding money, he would like to those who he provides security for, they should essentially pay for the privilege of being protected in different forms. In terms of wars, I think it's also a good indication that he's been favoring short wars. He's not opposed to military action, on the contrary, I think, but he doesn't want to get bogged down. And I think we've seen this many times. When he went into Yemen, it didn't play out as he had hoped. What did he do? Well, he just declared victory and went out. In Venezuela, he also had this quick in and out, and called it a great victory. So I don't think he's opposed to wars or keeping the American empire. He just wants the wars short, and he wants a return on investment. I think that's why the Iranian war is causing so much desperation for Trump, because I don't think he knew what he was getting into. I think he actually attacked when the markets were closed, hoping that he would have a victory by the time they were open. I mean, this is why when he now says, we're going to open end the blockade or something, that's about the time the market opens, when he will say something like this. So he's very, very focused on manipulating the markets. But no, so I think my point is he's in a position of great desperation, I think, because this is going completely against what he wants. So when you hear this report coming out of American media that is screaming when the planes got shut down, is just screaming to everyone, looking for a scapegoat. I don't really doubt those reports. I think that could be correct, that he's that is in a very desperate situation.
But do you at least doubt the ones that talk about him considering nuclear weapons?
I hope they're not real. I'm not sure. They could be to undermine him, or they could be leaked by him himself to appear more while there. So it's hard to say these days. Like I said before, and there's so much disinformation, and the narrative war is just up in 100 at the moment. So it's very hard to tell what is real. But with all this posts, I mean, there's a common theme here that is in all his tweets, all his statements. It's always he always has to go on the defensive. He never he never tries to explain himself. So if he's criticized, for example, then Tucker Carlson's a loser, low IQ. I mean, he always goes so aggressive forward. If something's gone wrong, he always denies it. And the most important of all, I think, is the claim for victory. Doesn't matter what happens. You can have several American planes shut down. He will still try to sell it as some kind of a Saving Private Ryan story. I mean, everything has to be a victory, and it's always been this. So I think this is also something that traps him, because there's nothing he can sell as a victory at the moment. But it depends. I hope that the ceasefire will be extended. He could spin something. They promised they won't make a nuclear weapon. Yeah, sure, they never were going to do it. We degraded their military. Yeah, of course, you've been bombing them. There's we wanted to kill their leadership. Yeah, we murdered many of them. I mean, there's a lot of things he can claim victory over. But the Strait of Hormuz is really the humiliation, which even after this peace, the U.S. can be stripped of much power in the region.
What do you think of the cargo ship that was seized a couple of days ago? I think it's yesterday by the US, and I think another one was seized today, an Iranian ship. The one yesterday they fired at as well. I didn't think it was that significant. I think it was expected. Iran was testing America's blockade, and America responded. Do you really think that Iran is? How seriously do you think Iran is taking it? Apparently, they fired. There's been some reports they fired some drones at the American warships. And now they're saying they will not attend the ceasefire negotiations unless this blockade is lifted. You think they mean it? You think they will not even attend the negotiations? Because that's pretty extreme. Like, the US attended negotiations while the Strait of Hormuz was closed, and they agreed to attend negotiations while the Strait of Hormuz was closed. Now, the Americans responded in kind. Iranians closed the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Americans are doing it, and the Americans didn't lift it even when the Iranians lifted it. But the Iranians should still, that point should be on the negotiating table in the next ceasefire negotiations. I just worry that Iran using that as a reason not to attend the negotiations is It's a dangerous step, a very dangerous step to jeopardize everything for that.
Yeah, no, I agree partly. That is, it is dangerous to throw away the whole prospect of a peace negotiation. Yeah, based on this. On the other hand, it's also dangerous to throw away your deterrence. That is, to allow the adversary to escalate without having any counter reaction. I think this is something that the Iranians learned from the Russians' mistake, because this is what the Russians have allowed NATO to do all along. The NATO escalates, and then the Russians do nothing. And then in the media, they can triumphantly say, "Oh, look, we can do anything." They're too afraid, so now we can continue to go up this escalation ladder. The Russians won't go with us. I think with the Iranians, this is something from the beginning that they have showed all along. That is, if America goes up, we will go up with them. So I think that they see it as dangerous not essentially to respond. That being said, I think also the Iranians perhaps were a bit. They could have been surprised. I mean, they haven't told me anything, but if I was Iranian, I would have been a bit surprised by how they announced the opening of the strait. I mean, this seemed like a layup for Trump. There you go, declare your victory. You killed many of our leaders. You degraded our military. We're not going to have nuclear weapons. Now the strait is open. Go home.
But there's always, hold on, Glenn. It's always been open. They still wanted to, no, but they were still charging a fee. They said it's open, but we're still going to charge a toll fee. But it's always been open, but as long as ships pay a fee.
Yeah, no, I agree with this, and I don't think it's going to be open. The Iranians, again, they're not going to open it. This is now seen as key to their security. So I don't think Iran's going to open it. I mean, I could be wrong. Who knows what comes out of these negotiations? But the rhetoric that it's now open, ships can start to go through. Trump essentially got what he wanted, and instead of arguing further, this was the point in time when the U.S. decided to put a blockade on Iranian ports. It just seems like when the Iranians are softening the rhetoric, at least at this point the Americans could come forth and say, at least no toll on our ships or something, but instead of taking the ball and running with it, they went with putting a blockade on the Iranians, which sounded like they wanted to sabotage.
The blockade was before. The blockade was before Iran announced the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. The blockade was there. They just haven't lifted it when Iran lifted theirs. But what I don't understand is two things. Number one is Iran, when they say they lifted their blockade, as far as I understand, they would always allow ships as long as the ships pay. So it's not really a lifting of the blockade, because as long as ships pay, they can always pass. And number two is them opening the Strait of Hormuz is not them conceding, because as long as they charge a fee and they have the ability to close it, which they've proven both, the leverage is still there. And as long as they charge a fee at the Strait of Hormuz, that's not really a full opening. That's a loss to Trump. And for Trump to accept that, there has to be some concessions on the Iranian side. They have to concede on the nuclear program for them to be able to keep charging a fee. And their rhetoric was like, we control the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. Putting international law aside, this whole war was illegal. But from the perspective of what's feasible in these negotiations, come in and say we control the Strait of Hormuz, there has to be concessions in return. Otherwise, what option are they leaving Trump? There is always the option he could just walk away, which is what me and you have always said, just walk away. You've created a mess. It's okay. Call it a win and walk the hell away. But that will be too embarrassing, even to his voters. And that won't work. They have to give him something.
No, I agree. But it was a strange time to do this, because there was a ceasefire. And yes, the Iranians were blocking the Strait of Hormuz. But to do the blockade during the ceasefire, I think this is something that demanded a response from the Iranians. No,
it's an act of war, so
yeah, very much so. And so it's I don't know. I think it's difficult for the Iranians not to respond to this, but it's also hard if you're on the Iranian side, you wanted to offer something that looks like an olive branch so both sides can begin to walk down the escalation ladder together. Then this seems like the thing, making this grand statement, something that Trump can use to hand to his base. Look what the Iranians are saying. They opened the Strait of Hormuz. All the world media was writing, "Oh, the Strait of Hormuz is open." He could have done something with this to walk down the escalation ladder. Instead, the assumption was the Iranians will go down the escalation ladder. Well, then we're going to go up to show that this is, cement the idea of a victory. And I think this is also what caused some splits within Iran. That is, that the US is in this difficult spot where they have to sell defeat as a victory. And to some extent, the Iranian government allows them to do this by essentially letting them get away with this kind of thing. I think that's what causes a lot of frustration within the Iranian government. But yeah.
As an update. So, as I said, according to the Wall Street Journal, Iran will only attend the negotiations if the US blockade is lifted. So it seems Iran is standing their ground. And New York Times has reported that Vance will not be attending the negotiations, been suspended after Iran refused to respond to US negotiating positions, according to American officials. I think that's Iran playing their card. The negotiations will happen. I'm very confident they'll still happen. I think Iran is just trying to get something in return. Maybe now the US promises them to lift the blockade as soon as the negotiations start. That could be part of the agreement. I'd be so surprised, and I'd have to revisit a lot of my positions if the ceasefire breaks down, Glenn. Honestly, I'd look at the IRGC as being less pragmatic, or still very vengeful, or there's something there that maybe very emboldened after the war. And it reaffirms my position that Trump needs some sort of political win. So I don't know. I just really would be very surprised if the ceasefire talks collapse and there's clashes again.
No, well, I agree then that both sides would have an interest in not continuing the war, but there's not going to be a peace agreement. So, as said before, the best to hope for is extending the ceasefire. But under what conditions? I'd have a hard time accepting or believing that Iranians would somehow accept this blockade on its ports. As you said before, a blockade is a declaration it's an act of war. And in contrast, the Iranians, they can justify what they did in the Strait of Hormuz, closing down in many ways. But it's important that, the Strait of Hormuz is not international waters. It's an international strait, and it's in the territorial waters only of Iran and Oman. So they can claim that this is legal. Also Iran isn't member, neither is the US, by the way, a party of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, the UNCLOS. And so they're not really bound by any treaty, as neither the US nor Iran has signed them. So I think they see this as being different from what the Americans are doing now. So if they accept going to negotiations as the US escalated during the ceasefire, I think it sets a very dangerous precedent. From now on, the US can just escalate in any area and then use this for leverage in negotiations. So I think they will demand the Americans take this away, remove the blockade, and then we'll go continue the ceasefire as before. But you're not going to do gradually, incrementally go up that escalation ladder, punish Iran more without Iran responding in some way. So, but again, it could be that they follow through with it in some ways. Rarely it's either or. They can always have the negotiations, but send a bit, less senior negotiators, something to, push back against what the US is doing. But I'm quite pessimistic, though.
Fuck.
I could be wrong, so I wouldn't curse just yet.
How would, if we return to a conflict, do you think it will be similar escalation ladder again? Or do you think the gloves will be off even further now, with Iran being very emboldened? And it also, I'm sure it depends on who strikes who first. But let's say it's the US that does the first strike, which I think Iran won't be the first to conduct a strike. If the US is first to strike, how do you think Iran would respond this time, considering that will be the third time they are struck in the midst of negotiations?
Well, they're probably hit back hard, and also now the US has built up a lot of assets in the region, so there's much more targets for the Iranians to hit. And also, I think the Iranians will have to hit not just a third attack on Iran, but also this one will probably be much uglier. That is, the US has more firepower now, but also, as Trump has made point out of, we're running out of military targets to hit because they have decentralized, dispersed. And for this reason, I think the strategy of the US now is, well, to some extent, just cause so much pain as possible on Iran to the point that they will submit to whatever the US puts in front of them. So I think from this perspective, the US will probably hit hard, but go after a lot of civilian targets. There is a lot of infrastructure, bridges, railroads, I don't know, markets, power grids, whatever they can go after. And this will compel the Iranians to respond in a similar way. So I don't know. If this whole thing breaks down, it's, I think they would, at least with infrastructure, go after the Gulf states and Israel.
Yeah, they made a threat.
Way.
They made a threat on this. Not sure if you saw it. There was a threat that came in from Tasnim news agency yesterday. Iran is reportedly planning a single coordinated strike that would target the Yanbu pipeline in Saudi, the one they use to circumvent the Strait of Hormuz. They'll target the Fujairah oil facility in the UAE, not far from where I am, which is the UAE's alternative to the Strait of Hormuz. And they would target the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which would be catastrophic as well. And that's a card they haven't played yet. So if they play these three cards, that's 32%, a third of global oil supply will be shot. And that's putting aside what they could do to the gas fields in Qatar and other stuff as well. They've got so many targets and they've shown the ability to be able to target them. But if these three things in the Strait of Hormuz is a third of oil supply, Glenn. That's messed up. Well,
I saw a comment coming out from Yemen. I forgot who made it, but official statement that if the US and Israel renew their military aggression against Iran, then they will not sit this one out, then they will join in. And I think the most important contribution, to use that word, they can bring to the table would be to shut down the Red Sea. So I think this would be...
Was that yesterday?
I think it was today.
So I'm just asking the team to find a statement. That's pretty significant as well, because they've been the wild card that everyone was watching throughout the war. That's pretty significant.
Let me see here. I have something here. Yeah. Abdul Malik al-Houthi, leader of Yemen's Ansar Allah, said that we will not remain neutral against any aggression towards Iran. So if the current ceasefire comes to an end, our position is clear. We're not neutral, and we're gonna, in the American-Israeli aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
When did he say that? That's pretty.
I think this was out today, a few hours ago. But that being said, he didn't mention the strait there, and he didn't mention the Red Sea. But if they would join in, I mean, that little level from, launching missiles towards Israel or shutting down the Red Sea, I think that's a very small one.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's not going well,
things can go very wrong very quickly. So it's... but again, I haven't... I think it can still go both ways. As you said before, like my essential conclusion is simply that I think both sides want to find an end to this, to get out of this, but they're too far apart for anything. It's like I just don't see how it's possible because Trump has to, whatever horrible deal that Trump gets, he has to find a way of selling it as a victory. And I just don't think what the Iranians are offering remotes anything like a victory. Looks like a victory. But also just, if Yemen, or the Houthis as we call them, joins in, it's quite an important fighting power, though. I mean, it's nothing like Iran with its 90+ million people, but they still have more than 30 million people. Compared to the Gulf states, this is quite significant, though.
Okay, so there's a statement that was put out, a famous verse from a Persian verse was put out by the president. I won't read the verse. It's not too long, but it's just a very vague. But essentially it means Persia, Iran had peace, then hardship returned. It's a prayer for that suffering to be removed again, for the hardship to be removed again. So it was put out by the Iranian president. The rhetoric, and then the foreign minister put out a similar statement criticizing the voices in Iran that are urging the Iranian government to attend the peace talks. The rhetoric is pointing in a bad direction in the last hour, and I'm not talking about the rhetoric, the posturing rhetoric, but what on the Iranian side, I worry. This is the first time I'm starting to worry that it's an indicator that things are going sour, and the markets have responded accordingly. Oil is back above $90. I don't know what it's at now, but it was above $90 when the markets opened. Let me check now. It's at just over $90. So the markets are not reacting positively to what we're seeing. And that's $90 considering there's going to be the long-term impact of this war is already going to be, detrimental to the global markets, will take months to recover. So that's pricing that in and pricing in the risks of a renewed conflict. It was as low as $80 at one stage, or $82, $83, $84 a few days ago. So everything's pointing in that direction. Are you worried that we may see, as you said, things can go very badly very quickly? Can you maybe give me probability in your mind of limited response and limited strikes on the escalation letter, or limited American strike, maybe a decapitation strike, and a limited response by Iran versus a full-blown gloves-off response by Iran, or one by the US? So which one is, because I think Iran's more likely to go in gloves off because they're in a different mindset to the US. Trump does not want escalation now. Very different to the beginning of the war.
Well, I think Trump is struggling for this escalation dominance, where he says, I can bomb a little bit and then Iran can respond a little bit. But I think this is a death trap for the Iranians. If they accept this kind of thing, then they send all the wrong signals. Then the US will essentially definitely be back if they think they can do a little bit of bombing and then stop it at their when they choose to. So I don't think that the Iranians will accept this. If you bomb a little bit, then they will hit back very hard. I think they're reluctant to strike first. I think they're seeing all the American assets in the region. There's a good incentive to hit first. But I think the Iranians are experiencing something they've never seen before, which is that the large parts of the world is quite sympathetic towards Iran now. This is quite an achievement on Trump's part, or this is also part of how the war has been pursued. That is, this continuous, two surprise attacks, this kind of aggressive rhetoric. The fact that the Iranians are actually meeting with the United States to negotiate even after all of this, I think a large part of it is to also communicate to the international community that, we are the civilized here. We are the ones who are, willing to talk and make peace. It's the other side that's calling for, the death of civilizations, wiping out people, attacking nuclear reactors.
There's a report in one of the Telegram groups. Sorry to interrupt you, Glenn. I think you want to know this. B-52H bombers, the Strait of Hormuz strategic bombers, the radioactivity has been recorded on the U.S. Air Force high-frequency global communication system that just came out 2 minutes ago. So essentially, that indicates they're airborne and talking to command, which is sometimes a sign of heightened readiness or ongoing operations. Now, I'm not a military expert, obviously. I'm not sure if you know more about this and whether that means anything, or whether we get these false alarms often. Have you seen those reports before, or is that a first for you?
I'm not sure, but they do have this. It doesn't have to mean anything that the U.S. is essentially posturing. It
could be all a bluff. It could be all a bluff.
It could be a bluff to encourage the Iranians to negotiate.
Okay, apparently, they are common. Yeah, sorry. Low signals just means aircrafts are active. Does not mean there's an imminent strike. But they could indicate an imminent strike. But it's also it happens. Where there's long range flights or training operations or global patrols or whatever it is.
But the
timing of it is interesting.
The timing and the amount of military at some point. I mean, it's okay to escalate a little bit, send some more weapons to the region to essentially pressure the other side to accept a more unfavorable deal. But the amount of resources which is being sent to the region, it feels like it's to the extent that they're being sent to be used. At least that's how I see it. also, I don't see Trump making any deals. I mean, I was in Iran actually in May last year, and I borrowed for my podcast. I borrowed a TV studio of one of the I think it was Press TV in Iran, in Tehran, to do a podcast interviewing some people there. And the main theme I remember then was making the point that whatever deal that Trump comes forward with, it's it is going to fail, because he demands too much, and then he doesn't have that room to maneuver, because he can't make any compromises to the point that it's not sold as a victory, and he has to come out of everything looking victorious, and it's not possible with Iran. So especially because of the history of it. I mean, he still blames Obama for making bad deals. He's the one who ripped up the JCPOA, all on the premise that he could get a better deal. Now he's selling the war that he had kind of the foresight and the bravery to actually do something about the Iranian menace. So the idea that he can walk away now with Iran coming out of this stronger, I think it's near impossible. So I don't see any deal. This is my concern. So, if I would bet on war breaking out again, and in a big way.
Well, how can Glenn, Trump can still walk away? And the CNN report just came in now, something we and you have talked about before. U.S. military stockpiles of key missiles has been heavily depleted during the Iran war, creating a, quote, near-term risk of running out of ammunition in a future conflict, should one arise in the next few years. Over roughly 7 weeks, the U.S. is estimated to have used about 45% of its precision strike missiles, at least half of its THAAD interceptors, and nearly 50% of Patriot missiles, according to assessments aligned with Pentagon data. It has also expended around 30% of its Tomahawk missiles and 20% of several other advanced systems. Fucking hell. How's it? And then officials say current supplies are still sufficient for ongoing operations. In a month, you have half of your precision strike missiles and half of your THAAD interceptors. Those are wild numbers when the Ukraine war is raging and there's fears of Taiwan, and the Iran war could still... Because Iran knows this information. That's what's craziest about it.
No, that's it. And that's a good reason why they shouldn't make that many compromises. It's not just that the Americans have shuffled a lot of new weapons into the region. It's also that, they can't afford to use everything. And if they go on for like 2-3 more weeks, what do they have left? And since you brought up the Ukraine war, this is something, Zelensky is making the point as well, that in terms of air defenses, the situation can't get any worse than it is now. The Europeans are making comments that the Americans are either diverting or delaying supplies of important weapons. So, no, things are... this will be felt all over. It's being felt not just in Europe, it's being felt in East Asia, where they're also being stripped of their air defenses. So
that's fucking wild.
Yeah, so I think
But then this is why like how can Trump not walk away, Glenn? That's what I mean. How can he not walk away when you've got in a month? How could you continue the war? Just based on simple math, I'm not being strategic expert here. If you've got 5 weeks and 45% of precision strike missiles and half of THAAD interceptors are gone, in 7 weeks, how can you sustain another prolonged conflict? Why wouldn't Iran do another 7-week war? It will destroy their country. It will kill more of their leaders. It will destroy more of their military capabilities, yes. It would weaken the country as a whole, but it would completely screw the US. And if China promises, hey, Iran, we'll replenish all your stockpiles, just please deplete American stockpiles for us, so we have a walk in the park when it comes to Taiwan. Just do that for us. We'll do anything you want. We'd sign a deal right now. We'll give you $100 billion over 3 years. Man, that sounds like a deal worth considering, at least.
Well, I would get a similar call from President Putin probably, because this is also depleting all the weapons going to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is still very much an American war. They're the ones sending a lot of the weapons. They still have their intelligence. They provide the intelligence. They have the intelligence services there. So this is impacting everyone. So no, I think they face a dilemma. I think neither the Chinese nor the Russians want this kind of instability and the prospect of Iran being destabilized or even destroyed. So I think they would like to put an end to it. That being said, the depleting of U.S. military resources is definitely seen as a positive development. No, I think this is the main
positive development for peace, you mean?
Yes, definitely, because they would like to see the U.S. empire rolled back, and when you don't have weapons, you can't fight wars anymore. It doesn't really get simpler than this. So I think, about Trump, I think this is the main problem. On one hand, the situation is dire; it's very desperate. On the other hand, he can't walk away from this.
Why?
And
why he can't walk away from this?
He has to sell it as a victory somehow.
But he does. He sells everything as a victory. He's already selling it as a victory. Some people are saying we won. Iran's Navy and Air Force have been annihilated. Their nuclear program, he sold the 12-day war, the limited strike as a victory in annihilating their nuclear program. People believed it. He can sell this as a victory, and that's a good thing. People would believe him. His voters would believe him. And they'd forget it. If it's not a victory and they know, you're bullshitting, you lost, but it's fine, you walked away, they'll forget it. They'll move on. And by the time of the midterms, there's a million things that are going to happen.
But a defeat, besides what it means for Trump, it's also what it means for the American empire, though, because it's going to be hard. It's going to be very difficult to recover from this. As I said before, without the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. begins to become evicted from the entire region. This is, if the authorities in Qatar, United Arab Emirates, maybe less Saudi Arabia, because at least they have the Red Sea coast. But if you're these smaller countries, what would you do if the Iranians now control it? Your entire livelihood, economy, everything depends on the goodwill of Iran. Wouldn't you start to scale back the American military presence? Wouldn't you consider selling your oil in other currencies?
I'm seeing next week. I'm talking to the former advisor to MBZ, the president of the UAE, and you saw a statement 2 days ago. He said it's time for American bases to pull out of the UAE. He's obviously not the current advisor, not the sitting advisor, but for someone like him, who I'm sure is very close to the royal family still, to make a statement like this, it's already showing a reshuffling of allegiances and strategies by Gulf countries.
But that's why, they often say that in strategies, it's always the most dangerous when you end up with an all or nothing. And this is definitely all or nothing. And you've seen a similar rhetoric coming out of UAE. On one hand, it seems the most, not gung-ho for war, but most supportive for the United States in the attack on Iran, because if one could knock out Iran, this will be great for United Arab Emirates. However, that being said, if Iran isn't going to get knocked out, then they have to make a massive adjustment and try to improve these ties with Iran. So it's either or at this point, and this is the point. You can't really go back to the way things were, and I think this is where the desperation is, and this goes beyond Trump. I know that some people in the U.S. have called for just walk away. Joe Kent, for example, he's made this point. There's this other option that is just say it's not our war, it's not our problem,
just
not our strait.
We literally discussed it 4 days ago. We were, I think you were on the show as well later on that day. But I said the same thing to him. He's like, Mario, like first he was more optimistic, but that was 2 days ago, 3 days ago. So things have changed since. But he did say the best option would be, and I think he posted after that. He made a post as well about it, saying best thing to do is just walk away. Like that's honestly the best solution right now. Because if we continue trying to get some win, even not through military means, we may be forced, or Trump may be forced into having no choice and be in a corner where he has to, again, go back to military means. And then you have the unintended escalation happening afterwards.
Yeah, if the US goes down this pathway, doing, for example, a ground invasion, I mean, nothing could be worse at this point. This is the, one stupid decision following the other. So I think if in the greater scheme, he can pretend to go back to his original goal. You and I spoke about this before. That is, his whole strategy for a multipolar world was we have to pivot to the Western Hemisphere. We have to pivot to East Asia. And in the Western Hemisphere, we do our thing in Venezuela. And, the great powers don't dare to intervene here, which is correct. They can try to knock out Cuba. They can annex Greenland. Like, to take control of Western Hemisphere, they can send what remains of their military resource to contain China, but they have to pivot out of the Middle East and Europe. Now, this could be on a plate for Trump if he says, okay, just hammer a lot of missiles which are left in the region at Iran, and then just say, okay, we're done, we're leaving. We decimated their army. They don't have the nuclear potential. This is not our strait anyways. It's for other people to look after. And by the way, the Europeans never helped us. NATO's a paper tiger. They betrayed us. They're traitors. We'll pull out from Europe as well. We're done with NATO. Now they pivot out of the Middle East, and Europe, doesn't have to be complete, and adjust to this new world. I mean, it sounds dramatic, but the situation in the international system now is quite dramatic. We're seeing this is a bit like the collapse of the Soviet Union, ending a bipolar Cold War. This is the collapse of the unipolar moment. This is, this is a multipolarity asserting itself. The US will have to make some very dramatic choices. I think Iran is hoping to benefit greatly from this, though. But again, at this point, it can go any way. They can agree on peace. They can go back to war. It is a possibility that something would happen within Iran. I doubt it, but I think I wouldn't. This is why it's so dangerous at the moment. It's I think anything could happen, and let's say the U.S. those reports that. Trump wanted the nuclear codes and was stopped. This kind of things. I'm not sure if this is real, but it could be real. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that much, given the desperation and the possible anger that's currently there.
I don't know. I just don't think the US is bogged down as we think, because they could just, it's not like Iraq and Afghanistan. You've got troops on the ground that will take months to withdraw, and you're having daily casualties, very limited casualties. I know they seem significant, but when you compare them to casualties that the US has faced in previous wars, they're relatively limited, especially when it comes to deaths and casualties in terms of American soldiers. And the US can just walk away. So he's not stuck in a ground war. He hasn't started a ground invasion. Now, Robert Pape talks about how this is a ground operation is imminent, and it's been part of the plan since the get-go. And this is all part of the plan. This is all a distraction as the US builds up their troops, and they sent even more troops to the region. That would be suicidal. But would you also not even take that off the table, considering the developments today?
Well, they could, but it depends where they would be used. I think going into Karg Island and all, I think it makes no sense. I think it could be that the US would decide just to blow up the whole island. That would be one thing, but invading it and holding it, they would sit there like sitting ducks. They would be too easy to target by the Iranians. So, and otherwise, they could be used more like, if it's more, I've seen things more likely they could be used against Yemen, to be honest, to make sure that they keep the Red Sea open at least. Again, I'm not sure if that's a great idea. The Yemenis are kind of battle hardened over the past decades, so I think it's unlikely. I think this would pull in the US. There's no pulling back after this. At least now Trump has an out. There hasn't, as you said, been that many casualties. He could pull out and say it's not our problem. Once the soldiers are in and you begin to take large casualties, it's going to be very difficult to walk away after this.
As a final question, there's something that Ghalibaf said. There's new cards that Iran has on the battlefield. What do you think he means by that? The Houthis or something else?
Sorry, one more time.
Ghalibaf said he rejected negotiations. He said no negotiations while there's a blockade, and he said that we have new cards on the battlefield. So what do you think he meant by that? Do you think they really have new cards, or just a bluff? Like, what is he referring to? The Houthis maybe? Or is there something more Iran could do? So I think maybe he's referring to the striking of 31%, 32% of the energy infrastructure in the Gulf. That's the only option that makes sense to me. But I don't know what other cards there could be. Houthis, which are included as part of that strategy.
Well, if Yemen is activated, I think this is quite dramatic. I mean, this will be This would make Saudi Arabia vulnerable if they would go after Saudi Arabia. But I think more how Yemen is used, though, it can be used in different ways. They shut down the strait, they can attack Israel, they can go after Saudi Arabia. I don't think they would necessarily do everything. I think probably not Saudi Arabia. I think they would hold off the Gulf states and keep that as a possible escalation if the Gulf states begin to intervene in Yemen. So if I was advising them, I would hold that off. I would start off with missiles at Israel, and then the next step you would shut down the Red Sea, and then if they continue to go up the escalation ladder, especially with involvement of the Gulf states, then take direct actions against Saudi Arabia. Some few drones towards its oil fields. There's a lot of things that can be done. Otherwise, it could just be new weapons. I assume that a lot of weapons have been built and supplied to Iran. Yeah, it's hard to say. There's a lot of new American assets which weren't there before as well. When you do a blockade, that's a lot of ships, which has to be in that very large region.
That's a good point.
These ships have to be supported and supplied. They need to go in for maintenance. Where exactly do they dock? I mean, there's a lot of targets now, and that's not great. So it looks nice when you build up a huge military presence, but if you can't protect these assets, you leave yourself very exposed. So I'm not sure what the Iranians are planning, but I'm sure they're getting, they have the weapons and they're getting good intelligence and advice also from external parties. So,
Glenn, always a pleasure, man. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you, Mario. Good to see you again.
See you, my friend. Mehdi, how are you, man?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I wish we spoke yesterday because I was a lot more. I just moved to a new place. The mic keeps falling. If we spoke yesterday, because I'm just traveling now, I would have been. Sorry about the mic. Guys, look at the mic right after this interview because it keeps falling. I would have been a lot more optimistic. But we're seeing developments now that the US delegation is not attending. Iran's already refused to attend. I'm still optimistic. I think the war is over. I think Trump knows he cannot afford the war. I'm not sure about the IRGC, the commanders there. I think they're very emboldened after their successes. I think the executive branch, Ghalibaf, Arachi, the president is less important. I think the executive branch won an end to the war. We saw indications of a bit of a split or disagreements within Iran, especially when Arachi posted that the Strait of Hormuz is open. But I'm still optimistic, but less so now. I'm probably the most worried since the ceasefire happened. What's your stance on the latest developments?
Yeah, I'm not optimistic. I've never been optimistic. I'm a pessimist by nature. And then when you deal with Donald Trump and you deal with Benjamin Netanyahu and you deal with all these actors in the Middle East, I'm not sure where you can find optimism from. I admire your optimism. The reality is that there is no end to this war until we deal with the underlying issues that started this war, and we haven't dealt with those issues. So you could talk about ceasefires and temporary pauses and negotiation. I mean, the Israelis are the masters of dragging out negotiations. We've been talking about two-state solution for 30 odd years, most of my adult life. That hasn't happened, but it's very, the Israelis hide behind peace process and negotiations. And I guess Donald Trump is doing the same thing. And we've seen him do that for weeks, every week to try and, he's got to worry about his own economy and stock market. So he keeps pretending that he's close to a deal. I don't know if you saw that video that went viral yesterday from CNN of all the times he said the war will be over soon over the last few weeks.
But the war, the war is currently at a pause. You were skeptical that Israel would abide by the ceasefire. They could break the ceasefire. They didn't. They stopped their move towards the Litani River. They've stopped strikes on Lebanon. Today, there were reports of rockets fired from Lebanese territory towards Israel or Israelis in South Lebanon. Channel 12's refuted those
they haven't
reports.
stopped the violence in Lebanon, Mary. I don't know where you're hearing that from. They're
destroying
entire villages.
Yeah,
I mean,
the idea they stopped that.
You stopped mass airstrikes. Yeah,
exactly. They're abiding by the ceasefire, so something that a lot of people.
Israel has never abided by any ceasefire. In fact, there was a ceasefire. I have to keep reminding people. I'll remind your viewers as well. There was a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah from November 2024 to February 2026, in which Israel violated the ceasefire 15,400 times. That's not my number. That's the UN peacekeepers' number. They killed 400 Lebanese people during that ceasefire. In the Middle East, ceasefire means everyone ceases, but Israel fires. That's how it's always been.
Was Hezbollah, hold on, in that ceasefire in Lebanon, was Hezbollah rebuilding in the south? Because that was a breach of the ceasefire, and you know that. Were they rebuilding in the south in the meantime? So I think
I'm
both
sure they will,
sides
but
were breaching.
do you think that justifies 15? Do you think that justifies 15,400 violations of the ceasefire by Israel? I mean, the UN pointed the finger at Israel as the major violent violator
because
of the ceasefire.
they did violate, but I think Hezbollah violated as well. I'm just talking justifies. I'm saying the ceasefire was violated by both sides. It's like in Lebanon, what pisses me off.
There's no study or there's no report I've seen that says Hezbollah violated ceasefire 15.
But they fired a barrage of rockets from south of Lebanon. They couldn't just move those there instantly. They're fighting against Israel and having successes in south of Lebanon. They wouldn't be able to do that.
How many Israelis were killed during the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah?
A lot less.
Because I'm telling you, 400 Lebanese were killed. So let's not do both sides. Yeah.
No, but there is both sides, because in Lebanon, what Hezbollah does, and the reason I'm really upset at Hezbollah, you know how upset I am at what Israel is doing.
You can be upset at Hezbollah. I'm not saying not to be. Lots of Lebanese people upset with Hezbollah. But Israel is the underlying cause in this region.
True, but they're giving justification for Israel. They're not doing Lebanon a favor. Okay, so that's what I mean. I think Israel doesn't need justification.
I don't need to agree with the tactics or the strategies of various militant groups in the region. Obviously, I didn't agree with October the 7th from a moral or legal point of view, and also from a strategic point of view. It was absolute devastation brought on Gaza. We can all criticize Hamas's decisions. I'm sure many people in Hamas criticize Hamas's decisions, the people who weren't involved in the political bureau. That's not the point, though. The point is not whether a militant group does something right or wrong. The point is you're asking about ceasefires, and I'm saying Israel has a long history in the region of violating ceasefires, of killing negotiators. Even when Hamas, for example, abided by ceasefires, and this was vouched for by independent people, it was Israel that vouched this violated ceasefire. Who violated the ceasefire with Iran? Mario, for years after October 7th, you know this, Israelis went on to TV shows across the world. I'm sure they came on your show, and they said there was a ceasefire on October the 6th. There was a ceasefire on October the 6th. Hamas violated the ceasefire. First of all, there wasn't. Israel had already killed lots of people in Gaza and the West Bank. But this idea that you break a ceasefire and that justifies retaliation, well, hold on. There was a ceasefire between Iran and Israel after the 12-day war. Wasn't there a ceasefire? I saw a ceasefire last year that Donald Trump secured between, it's one of the wars he claims to have ended, remember? His 8 wars. So who broke that ceasefire on February the 28th? Israel and the United States. Israel has a long history of breaking ceasefire. There's a reason Trump put out a statement saying, I prohibit Israel from breaking the ceasefire. Very strong statement from an American president.
Macron, you see me looking down, the team just sent me a piece of news. Macron, as you see Europe standing up to Israel, Macron is threatening to cut the 1995 EU-Israel agreement if Israel, quote, doesn't change their policy. How significant is that?
So it's interesting. The EU's been all over the place on this because sometimes they make very positive noises about holding Israel to accountability, holding Israel to international law, dealing with things like settlement-produced goods. And then sometimes you hear the Germans and the French saying ridiculously pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab things. I think the defeat of Orban is an interesting moment for the EU because he was seen as Netanyahu's ally on the inside, the spoiler who would prevent any kind of serious action by the EU. I mean, I don't think the EU will ever do sanctions, but if they were going to do sanctions, Orban would have been the block on that. Macron is all over the place. I mean, the French presidents, Mario, are always over the place. As long as I've been alive, French presidents have been all over the place on the Middle East. I remember Jacques Chirac, who I will stop the Iraq war. And remember he went to, was it Jerusalem, where the Israeli police manhandled him as he was trying to see some Palestinians and people were cheering him. But then on the other hand, the French government has also done lots of crazy things in terms of arms sales to these countries. So I think they want to be all things to all men. I have no faith in the EU after 2.5 years of genocide in which the EU foreign policy chief constantly defended Israel. But let's see. I mean, Israel has become so bad that they've pushed away their own allies.
Brent crude just broke $100 a barrel.
It's all fake news, Donald Trump will say, Mario.
Shit.
Trump would say, it's all fake news. The economy's great. Did you hear his interview on CNBC this morning? Didn't fill you with confidence?
Well, it did actually, because the more threats he makes, whenever he makes threats, it's actually a good indicator. Because for me, it just seems he shows he just wants an off ramp. He's trying to tell Iran, please give me an off ramp. The comment that he made,
he's had an off ramp for a while, Mario, and he hasn't taken it. I mean, some of us are saying, do a George W. Bush, declare victory, say mission accomplished, go home, say you degraded the Iranian Navy, say you degraded the Iranian ballistic missile stockpile, say you killed Khamenei, and just go home. But he won't do it. And in fact, Witkoff and Kushner will not budge. And now they've got Vance on board as well with this zero enrichment bullshit, which was not the position of the Trump administration a year ago. This is the Israeli position that the American government has adopted. No Iranian government, moderate, conservative, IRGC, non-IRGC, older Khamenei, younger Khamenei, no one's going to agree to zero enrichment. So as long as that is on the table in Islamabad, Vienna, Geneva, Oman, wherever, there is no deal to be done.
I'll tell you what one of the comments he's made before we go back to Israel, Lebanon, and Israel's role in all this, because I have an interesting theory. Actually, let me just jump directly to the theory. And I was speaking to former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert just earlier today. I haven't published the interview about this theory. And I think that I know everyone's been saying the tide is shifting against Israel. It's hard to deny those numbers, but I think it's going to start with Trump. Trump is probably going to lash out at being dragged into this war. I could be wrong. I hope I'm right. He's going to lash out at being dragged into this war. You saw the New York Times article. Netanyahu and Israeli intelligence played a key role in Trump making the decision to strike now. Not the only reason, but a key reason for him to do that. So I think he's pretty pissed off at Netanyahu. Again, it's not according to sources. I'm just speculating here. And I think his way to get a political win from this is to begin. I can see you're trying to stop smiling. You seem to strongly disagree with me. I don't look up. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but maybe he could be the first president to start the tide that is already happening across the world. The poll numbers speak for themselves. That could be his chance to turn this catastrophic war into something positive for the US.
Yeah, I wish I agreed with you, Mario, but I don't. And I've seen Trump for too long on this scene. I've seen what happened in 2024 when people put a lot of faith in Trump. Mario, I met Palestinian friends of mine who said, we prefer Trump to Harris. We think Trump would be better on Israel. We think Trump will do a deal with Netanyahu, will do a deal with MBS and Erdogan. He's a transactional guy. He's not a Zionist in his gut like Joe Biden. They had high hopes. And then there was this, you remember the ceasefire when he came into office that lasted like 2 minutes, and people were really, really happy about it. And people on the left, some people on the left were cheering him on. It was all bullshit. Donald Trump now has doubled down on his relationship with Netanyahu. There was a brief moment where he attacked him because Netanyahu had praised Biden for winning the election, but they've been pals for a while. And you saw, you're mentioning the New York Times reporting from a couple of weeks ago, the one with Netanyahu in the Situation Room, convincing Trump to go to war. But since then, you saw the Truth Social post at the weekend where Trump went out of his way to say, number one, he loves Israel and Israel's a great ally. Number two, that Israel did not make me go into this war. I made my own decision after October the 7th. And I said Iran can never have a nuke. He has had an off, to go back to your words, he's had an off-ramp with Israel for a while too. He could have used the Tucker Carlson, MTG, MAGA split on this to go, you know what? It is a time for recalibration. You know what? MAGA wants me to think again. My base wants me to think again on this, but he didn't. Instead, he doubled down on the neocons. He lashed out at the people trying to get him to take some distance from Israel. He called Tucker and Megyn Kelly and MTG and Alex. He called them all low IQ, and Alex Jones clearly is. I don't know about the rest of them. But the reality is that he's had multiple chances to distance himself from Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. Instead, he's gone the other direction. And look, Trump is surrounded by people who tell him, he's a person who's influenced by the last person in the room, and he's surrounded now by pro-Israel hawks. And the fact that Jared Kushner is leading these negotiations, you and I have spoken before about Kushner. You're well aware of Kushner's relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. The idea that Donald Trump is going to turn on Netanyahu, and Jared's not going to have a say in that is absurd. I mean, he's brought in his son-in-law, who at least in the first term, despite not getting security clearance, was an official in the White House. He was a senior advisor to the president. Now he's just a private citizen. He's just this dude with an investment fund getting billions from the Saudis, a failed property developer with no security vetting, no clearance, no Senate confirmation, and he's leading the most important negotiations in the world. The idea that Trump is going to throw Israel into the bus is pie in the sky. I wish, Mario, I wish. No evidence of that.
Fuck. It's not looking good today, man. It's really not looking good. I still think I'm still optimistic, but a lot less than.
But when you say optimistic, Mario, just walk me through that. What happens in your
I just think Trump is a lot more pragmatic and transactional.
No, I get that, but what actually happens? What is the deal, and what happens in a month from now?
He creates his own off ramp and he just walks away. Joe Kent told me the same thing, Mario. That's the best scenario. Best case scenario.
Okay, he walks away. I can buy into him walking away.
The rest of the world will clean it up. The rest of the world will clean it up. They have to figure out the Strait of Hormuz. They have to make deals with Iran. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz temporarily for a period of time.
What does Israel
The Gulf
do?
countries. I think Israel's days. First, I don't think Israel had a big debate with Cenk on this. We disagreed on it. Cenk believes that Israel controls the U.S. I think they have a lot of influence, but they don't control U.S. foreign policy. And maybe Cenk agrees with that, but he just kind of says controls because he's just kind of fed up. He's been covering this for so many years, poor guy.
Maybe, but I think that takes agency away from the American government, the American
I don't know what happened.
Complex.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think enough people. I think people talking a lot about Israel is great. I really want to see a new administration in Israel for the sake of Israelis, the region, and the world.
Yeah, but a new administration is not going to change things, right? I mean, this is a myth. One of my big critiques of the center left in the US, you look at people like Bernie Sanders and others, is they're happy to go after Benjamin Netanyahu. You listen to Bernie Sanders say, no more arms to Benjamin Netanyahu. And somebody on Twitter had a good line. They said to Senator Sanders, like, what country is this Benjamin Netanyahu that you refer to? Like, he talks about Israel as if it's Benjamin Netanyahu is Israel. And if we got rid of Benjamin, that would be, no, the country as a whole is problematic. Society has gone full far right. Israeli society is fully genocidal. Watch Israeli TV, watch the clips of panel discussions on Israeli TV where they talk about burning down Gaza and killing all the Arabs and destroying Iran and no innocent children. These people have gone fully genocidal, and even the opposition are full of hawks. There is no Israeli left today, Murray. There's no Israeli peace camp.
You're one of the most vocal, have been for many years, one of the most vocal people that oppose generalizations and throwing.
Yeah, I'm not generalizing. You want me to give you some polling on what Israelis believe right now?
I know the polls show this, but if there's a new administration with different rhetoric, if you have a president that does not call IDF soldiers that stuck a knife up someone's rectum and stomped him and all that, and he calls them heroes. If you have different people and different narratives in the media,
get rid of Ben Gvir and the rhetoric, fine. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do about, for example, here's something for you. What are you going to do when Yair Lapid, the supposedly secular centrist opposition leader, is asked about the Huckabee Tucker Carlson interview where the Greater Israel Project was mentioned, and Lapid says, "Yeah, we support that." What do you do about that? He's supposed to be the opposition. He's saying openly, on the record, we also support a greater Israel.
What's happened, Mehdi, I think what's happening is Netanyahu is feeding a cycle of violence, bombing Syria at a time when Syria has nothing to do with anything. They're trying to sort out their own mess. He's dragging the US into into a war with Iran, that dragged Hezbollah back into the war. And now he's, you saw my post where I was criticizing Israel for leveling villages in South Lebanon, because I'm like, guys, you've just broken your whole strategy in Lebanon was being more targeted than Gaza, so people turn on Hezbollah and support your actions, and then now you go in and level villages, which kind of destroys anyone that had any faith in Israeli intentions. That's been destroyed.
Which people have faith in Israeli intentions? I'd love to.
No, there's a lot of people, and I was one of them. I thought I wasn't absolutist, but I was above 50. I was like 60% likelihood that Israel does not want to annex Lebanese territory. I'm talking about the Israeli policy. They just want the threat of Hezbollah gone.
Oh, now, obviously, there's Mario.
I know you disagree.
This is where your optimism. This is where your optimism undermines your entire political argument, because in the interest of being optimistic, you end up being quite naive. With respect, the Israelis have been very clear about the fact that they want southern Lebanon.
No. You can't say there's. It's not Israeli policy.
It's been part of the. No, it's worse than Israeli policy, Maurice. I want to go further. It is at the heart of the Zionist project. It has been heart of Zionism for over 100 years. Go check out the piece we ran for Zeteo from a Jewish historian about how, go back to Theodor Herzl 100 years ago, 30 years before the creation of Israel. Theodor Herzl was writing about how the Litani River will be our border in Lebanon. Go back and see Chaim Weitzman in 1919 talking about taking parts of Lebanon. Go back to 1948 where they're talking about it. 1949 where they're talking about splitting up Lebanon into sections, destroying Lebanon as a modern state, taking chunks of southern Lebanon. This is part of the Zionist project. It's part of Greater Israel. And they've made it clear now. I was just on with an Israeli spokesman the other day on Piers Morgan's show, and he said, we're telling them to leave because we don't want them to get bombed. Hold on. You've told them to leave and not come back. That is ethnic cleansing. That is annexation.
That statement, yeah. Look, that statement changes things. But look, going back to the point on Israelis, I think Israeli foreign policy is feeding that mindset in Israel. When people start always believing threats, Hezbollah attacked us, without understanding what's leading to this. When there's a bunch of Syrian soldiers that came together without the authorization of the president, and they were marching towards Israel after that law was passed, where there's a death sentence only aimed at Palestinians that kill Israelis. A lot of people took offense to that, and they were marching to the Syrian-Israeli border. But in the mind of Israelis, they don't understand their actions are leading to this. I'm not saying it justifies. I hate when people mix something that led to something, doesn't mean it justifies it.
Agreed.
But I'm saying what the cycle of violence is being fed by flawed policy by Netanyahu. And if you have a prime minister that has different policy, that would reduce the violence. I think Israelis don't understand.
But what's your evidence, Mario, that other Israeli politicians are not supportive of this
human nature? Seeing this historically, I think when you have
you
different
just interviewed Ehud Olmert, right? You told me you interviewed Ehud Olmert earlier today. I've interviewed him a couple of times. Nowadays, he's a bit more of a peacemaker. He's very critical of Israeli war crimes. I think he even called for the indictment of Netanyahu. He hates Benjamin Netanyahu. He was a right-wing Israeli prime minister. In 2006, he launched Operation Grapes of Wrath, killed over 1,000 Lebanese, carried out a massacre in Qana, dropped all sorts of horrific munitions on top of civilian targets, pioneered the Dahiyya doctrine, where they just wiped out complete suburbs of Beirut, saying it's all Hezbollah. Like, this idea that this is Netanyahu, it is not just Netanyahu, Mario. I implore you to look at the constant history of Israel when it comes to the Middle East, and specifically Lebanon. I mean, 1978, they invaded Lebanon. 1982, they invaded Lebanon. That was the creation of Hezbollah. 1996, they massacred 100 people in Qana in a UN compound, lied about it. In 2006, they carried out multiple massacres in Operation Grapes of Wrath. Since October 2023, they have killed thousands of Lebanese. And of course, since the February 28th, they've killed, I think, 2,500 Lebanese, hundreds of children. April the 8th, Mario, April the 8th, they killed 300 people in Lebanon in 10 minutes. You find me an Israeli politician who dissented from that, who criticized that. Not a single one did.
While you're speaking as well, just kind of completely bury my optimism. Obida Ghassan, a strategic researcher for the Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, stated that Syria has rejected a U.S. request to disarm Hezbollah. I didn't know there was a U.S. request for Syria to disarm Hezbollah. It's like the perfect formula for a civil war in both countries. Ghassan emphasized that Syria
wants a civil war in Lebanon.
Yeah, exactly. They benefit greatly. Emphasized that Syria will not intervene to withdraw Hezbollah's weaponry, noting that this position, by the way, respect to that decision, noting that this decision remains firm if such a request were to come from the Lebanese government itself. Even if there's such a request would come from the Lebanese government. What's happening to my mic today?
Let me say this. Let me say this, Mario. I mean, you mentioned civil war. Can I just make a point here about the civil conflict?
Yeah, tell me.
This is a country that, from 1975 to 1990, one of the most horrific civil wars in the world. Massive political violence, sectarian violence. Christians killing Muslims, Sunnis killing Shia, Shias killing Christians, everyone killing everyone. Horrific war that went on for many years. They finally got through that war, tried to rebuild Lebanon, and then the 2006 war, of course, happened. And now you have the Israelis, and the Israelis were a big proxy power there, right? They supported the Maronite militias, Sabra and Shatila massacre in 1982, Christian militias backed by Ariel Sharon. We know Israel's role in Lebanon. And now, again, they haven't just invaded and annexed Lebanese territory and put in a yellow line like they did in Gaza. If you look at the New York Times reporting and look at the drop site news reporting, horrific reporting, where you have 8 Christian villages are being called by Israeli military officials and saying, not only do all the Shias have to get out of southern Lebanon, but if you provide safe haven to your Shia neighbors, if you keep them in your houses, in your towns, in your churches, we will bomb you too. I mean, that is Bond movie villain level evil, right? That is just on a level of, I mean, I hate to make Nazi analogies because I don't like reverting to Nazis. And of course, Israelis say it's anti-Semitic to compare anything they do to Nazis. But, you know, we grew up reading about Jewish children hiding in houses and people hiding them from the Nazis and being told, oh, no, you must turn on your neighbors. And here is the Israeli military saying, hey, Christians in southern Lebanon, hey, you better turn in any Shias hiding in your villages and towns. Otherwise, we'll bomb you. In a country that was already, trying to recover from a massive sectarian civil war. There's no other word to describe it other than evil.
Arachi also put out a statement saying blockading Iranian ports is an act of war and thus a violation of the ceasefire. Striking commercial vessel and taking its crew hostage is an even greater violation.
I agree with
Iran knows how to neutralize restrictions and how to defend its interests and how to resist bullying. It seems the IRGC putting their foot down. Is the ceasefire dead? Is it already dead? Well, you're seeing the beginning of the end.
It's supposed to end, Wednesday, right? We are Tuesday. Donald Trump said on CNBC this morning he would not extend it if there wasn't a deal done. He didn't accept that ongoing negotiations would be a good enough reason to extend it. Then again, Donald Trump has reversed himself on multiple Middle East issues over the last few weeks, as we've seen. He sets deadlines. He doesn't meet deadlines, thankfully. He set a genocidal deadline to end Iranian civilization. Thankfully, he did not do that.
What do you make? We haven't spoken about this, by the way. We haven't spoken in a while. What do you make of those statements? You're going to disagree heavily on me. They didn't bother me. I'm very critical of the war. These statements were an indicator that he was pressuring Iran to concede and he wants an off-ramp. That's the madman theory.
Again, I was going to say that is the madman theory. You beat me to it. It is the madman theory. The problem with the madman theory is it depends on the rational person pretending to be a madman. No one who knows anything about Donald Trump doesn't think he isn't a madman. I mean, this is not me saying this is some
Many people
name someone who thinks he's not unhinged. Who's not a sycophant?
38% of the population. I'm just going to give you not names.
Who cares about the American public? I'm talking about people who know
the American
him.
Public.
They don't know Donald Trump. I'm talking about people who work with him. Let's go through
General
the list.
Kane.
Let's go
General
through the
Kane.
list. Okay, let's go. Current sycophants. Let's go through the people who work with him. General John Kelly, former Chief of Staff. General Jim Mattis, former Defense Secretary. The other former Acting Defense Secretary on January 6th, whose name I forget right now. Just go through the list. Former National Security Advisor. Go through the entire list of people who worked with him in his first term. All of these military people, all of these Republicans, Rex Tillerson, all these Secretary of State, the top people around him. Not some underling, not some low-level, mid-level staffer in the Pentagon. Cabinet level national security officials, all of them, virtually all of them came out and said, we can't vote for him again. We're not going to endorse him for president in 2024. We don't think he's a stable person. One of them said that he was told to fire on unarmed protesters in the summer of 2020 outside the White House. Nobody thinks this man is a stable man. In fact, General Kelly, when he was chief of staff of the White House, Mario, he went quietly to a local bookstore and he bought The Case Against Donald Trump, which is a book about Donald Trump's mental health written by a dozen psychiatrists, because he needed to understand his boss a bit better. Like, these are the people who know him best. This idea that Donald Trump is some amazing genius playing 4D chess and playing it. No, we said that in the first term. We now have enough evidence to know the guy's unhinged. People are openly talking about the 25th Amendment in this town, thankfully, because that threat, by the way, and you look at the reporting at the weekend from the Wall Street Journal, it did not go through any national security layers. He did not consult with Rubio or Vance. That was Donald Trump shooting his mouth.
What if he doesn't mean it? What if, like, have you considered that option as well? Because actions speak.
I'll consider that option.
Let me give you context. Yeah, okay. Because the actions speak louder than words. And just look at his actions. I'm not going to talk about the war itself. The war is one of the stupidest wars. I vehemently disagree with the war. It's a horrific mistake. Yeah. I don't know what was going through his mind when he took that decision. But he's pulled out of the war, at least so far. We're not back into it. Let's talk about the reality right now. The war's not ongoing. There's no boots on the ground. He's forced Israel to abide by a ceasefire. For now, we're talking about right now. Tomorrow, people can take that clip and laugh at me because things can go to hell tomorrow or tonight. That happened before. And in Venezuela, people thought it was going to potentially be an invasion of Venezuela. He captured Maduro in a swift operation. Am I okay in it? No, I believe in international law, that system that was built after World War II to allow for the world to function, to avoid a new world war. So I disagree with a lot of his decisions, but they're not the decisions of a madman.
So even if, 100% madman, but even if I accept your premise that he didn't mean it, which I don't, but let's say for argument's sake that he didn't mean it. He's just Donald Trump on social media late night running his mouth. Oh, I'm going to try and threaten them with this threat. I do think actually words matter, not just actions. You cannot have the president of the United States, the leader so-called of the free world, making genocidal threats on his social media platform casually. I don't think you can do that, number one. I don't think it sets any kind of precedent for anyone else in the world. I think it's destroyed whatever was left of America's standing in the world. You saw the reaction globally, even from very close friends of the United States, even from allies like Meloni in Italy. We're kind of saying, you can't speak like this. You can't say you're going to end a civilization. Piers Morgan, who you and I both know, who always defends Trump, was like, I can't defend this. He was actually calling out Trump people, saying this is a civilization-ending threat. You cannot say stuff like that. By the way, I live in the United States of America, where if a college student says from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, apparently that's a threat of genocide, and you cut out funding to that college. But the president of the United States can actually say, I'm going to end Iranian civilization tonight. And the world is on tenterhooks till 8 p.m. wondering, is he going to use nukes? Is he not going to use nukes? The idea that we could even consider he would use nukes is absurd. But that's where we are. By the way, in his first term, Mario, he asked his advisors why they couldn't nuke a hurricane to stop a hurricane.
According to who? That's pretty crazy thing to say.
According to multiple people who worked for him. Everyone who's spoken about Donald Trump has been found out to be telling the truth, and every denial Trump's ever given has turned out to be false. So I start from the premise that everything Trump says is like, just this morning, by the way, on CNBC, he said inflation was 5% when he came into office. It was 3%. He lies every time he breathes.
I want to agree with your statement. Like, you know how me and you criticize people, maniacs like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, for making genocidal statements. I think you make a very good point. We can't criticize those maniacs for making those statements and then not criticize Trump for making very similar statements. Now, the only difference is they've delivered on their statements. Just look at Gaza instead of just being rhetoric. This is Trump. Usually doesn't speak like this, doesn't make statements like this, wiping out a civilization. With the other guys, you've got consistently making such statements and then delivering on them. So that's like the difference.
Can I make one last point on this about his instability? So this is reported stuff, and you'll say, who do we believe? But the reporting from the first term, which almost all of it's been vindicated, when John Kelly and Jim Mattis were in government, these are two former top generals, Marine generals. One is chief of staff, the other is defense secretary, quote unquote, adults in the room. under Trump's first term. We don't have any in the second term. We have RFK Jr., Kash Patel, and JD Vance. God help us. These two had a pact with each other, Mario, apparently, where they said neither of us will be out of the country at the same time. One of us always has to be in DC in case Trump tries to nuke someone. So the generals who were working
according
for him were always...
According to who?
According to one of the books that was written where they obviously spoke to them or people around them.
Okay.
Kelly and Mattis. I can't remember about it. Google it. But it's a very famous story from the first term. Kelly and Mattis had a pact where one of them would stay in town because they were so worried that their unhinged boss might nuke someone if they were both out of town.
There's a report now that came in that it's a positive one. According to Trump, Vance's trip could resume at a short notice if Iran responds in a way that he deems unacceptable, according to the New York Times.
Mario, you have a very low bar, my friend. You're like, it's optimistic news. Well, Vance going to Islamabad is not optimistic news. It's meaningless.
No, I'll tell you, no. For Trump to say that, or for New York Times to report that, for Trump to want to send Vance, despite Iran's rhetoric and the threats they're making, it just shows how keen he is for an off-ramp. Would you give him credit if he walks away from this and moves on to the next thing like Cuba? Would you give him credit then?
No, zero. I mean, think about what you're saying, Mario. Think about what you're saying. If I go out of my house right now and say, I'm going to kill everyone on my street, and I kill 20 people on my street, and then I say, actually, the last 10 people, I'm not going to kill them, I'm going home. No. Would you give me credit for ending my genocidal threats and war? I mean, come on, he started an unprovoked illegal war of aggression. Under the Nuremberg Tribunal, he committed the supreme crime.
If someone is a maniac or lost his mind, like you're saying, he wouldn't end the war today. If someone you're worried about him using nukes, if you're worried about someone potentially using nukes, and wiping out a civilization, and you're critical of these terms, and you're telling me about all the people that worked with him that consider him
But you're saying
insane.
I should give him credit for not going completely crazy. I'm not going to give him credit for not going completely crazy.
Would you at least reconsider your position that he is crazy?
No.
Because it's a 7-week war. We're talking about a country that's been through multiple forever wars, multiple decades long wars. This is a war that Israel would kill for.
But hold on. The geopolitical and economic consequences of this 7-week war are 1,000-fold the consequences of the war in Afghanistan over 20 years. You know that. There's just no debate about that. The geopolitical fallout from this 7-week war is much worse for the United States, the Western world, the entire world, the Middle East, than 20 years of fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. That's just a fact.
All right, what about this? Would you give him credit if there's a deal that involves unfreezing of assets, partial lifting of sanctions, in return for Iran giving up their nuclear program for, let's say, 15, 20 years, whatever they accept, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz? That's a deal that Israel would go crazy about. And if there's a deal like this on the
I wouldn't give him credit for it, but I would be happy that he did it, and I would support him doing it. And I'll tell you why I wouldn't give him credit, Mario. And I've said this before. I think I've said this on every interview I've done over the last 2 weeks. I'm going to say it again to your audience. Donald Trump is the master of creating problems that did not exist and then asking for credit for trying to solve the problem he created. So if you tell me I should give him credit for going back into a nuclear deal, well, I'm going to go, well, hold on. Wasn't there a nuclear deal before? What happened to that?
True, but
wait,
Mehdi,
he tore it up in 2018.
That one is true. But him walking away right now would be catastrophic for Israel and the balance of power. Gulf countries will have to learn to live with Iran. If he lifts sanctions and unfreezes their assets,
what you're saying, Mario, but do you not see yourself? You're grading him on a curve. You're doing the thing that I hate.
No, that's not a problem.
You're grading him on a curve. You're saying if this crazy man who started this crazy war and tore up that good nuclear deal gets back into a nuclear deal and ends the crazy war he started, can you give him credit, Mehdi? No, I'm not going to give credit.
Israel will be. If he does a deal like this, Israel would be worse off after that deal than it was for years, if not decades. If Israel would then have to accept Iran as a power in the region, because Trump has accepted Iran as a power in the region, they would
do everything they could to undermine it. So let's cross that bridge.
Let's say it works, but let's say the bridge is crossed. Do you understand how seismic that would be for the region? You've got Iran
Mario. This could have all last year, right? I mean, he's been in office for a year and a half.
But it didn't happen under Biden. It didn't happen under anybody.
I'm very critical of Joe Biden. It did happen under Barack Obama. You know that. It didn't happen under Joe Biden. That was a huge mistake by Joe Biden. Ben Rhodes and I had a long conversation at Zeteo about this, that Biden screwed it up. He paved the way for this. But Trump could have done all of this without all this war. He could have done it without the 12-day war. He could have done it without this war. You're asking me to say if he does a deal that was already existed, that he tore up, and then was on the table when he came back to office. The Iranians wanted to do a deal with him.
The Oman deal, yeah?
The Omani.
Did it involve that deal? It was really limited sanctions. I don't think there was any sanctions relief. I think there was unfreezing of assets.
The Iranians were keen on it. I mean, if they're happy with it, there must be something in it for them.
But
by the way,
could be
whatever deal
now.
we get now, I don't want to be mawkish about this, but whatever deal we get now, if we get a deal, I don't think we're going to get a deal. So we're just engaging in your optimistic hypotheticals. But if we get a deal right now, I mean, it doesn't bring back 160 dead, murdered schoolgirls. So I'm not going to give credit to the guy who killed 160 schoolgirls on day one of this unnecessary illegal war of choice.
I agree. Like, you're going back to the war being a stupid.
Yeah, that's the original sin, right? I can't just admit that.
But I think there's a bigger story. Like, if the power, the balance of power shifts in the region, I think that would lead to Israel would not be able to act with the same impunity they've acted for years, because now they understand. Look at Iran. Look at Iran's actions, Mehdi. Look at Iran's actions in Lebanon. Iran's like, we're going to jeopardize the entire ceasefire if strikes on Lebanon don't stop. That's a position Iran hasn't taken. I think Iran's restraint for many years backfired on them. But it's Iran after this war has reasserted control over the Strait of Hormuz, has shown that no one could block their ability, could stop them from blocking the Strait of Hormuz.
Yep.
And that's something that the US couldn't do, let alone Israel. With that new reality, the Gulf have to review their position when it comes to, as I've said, when it comes to Iran. Lebanon's position is very different. I think Israel being able to attack Lebanon with impunity would change. Hopefully, Mujtaba Khamenei will change his foreign policy as well, where Hezbollah is no longer used as a pawn by Iran to attack Israel, because that's at the detriment of Lebanon. You're smiling. I think you agree with that.
I agree with it, but I appreciate in these dark times. I appreciate your optimism and all of these hypotheticals and this positive domino theory. I just don't see any of it happening. I mean, maybe we'll talk again in a week or two, and I'll have to say, "I told you so, Mario," and you could say to me, "I told you so." I hope you're right. That's the difference. I hope you're right. I just don't think you are.
Well, as a final question, then, realistically speaking, where do you see this war? Where do you see all the discussions, the ceasefire negotiations, everything? Where do you see it by, let's say, by tomorrow first, see what happens in the next 24 hours. More importantly, by next month and by the end of the year, which I think
very good question. By tomorrow, I mean, first of all, I don't do predictions anymore. I don't do predictions on domestic politics. No way am I doing Middle East politics. Look, tomorrow, as I say, there's not going to be a deal tomorrow. The ceasefire, whether it holds or not, that's in Trump's head, and Trump's head, no one knows what's happening in Trump's head, including Trump. But I do think, to go back to what I said right at the start of our conversation, which is all of this is noise, right? Are they going to do a deal in Pakistan? Is there going to be this clause in this treaty? Are they going to open this part of this strait? All of it is noise, Mario. Ultimately, the underlying issue is, what do you do about how we got here? And how we got here is Israel wants to be the regional hegemon. They don't want to tolerate any power in the region that challenges them. They've already talked openly about Turkey being next. And I think we got to deal with the elephant in the room, which is Israel. Like, Donald Trump can do the best deal in the world, the greatest deal. He'll say it's the best deal that was ever done with Iran. Where does that leave Israel? If Israel does not sign on, they will be the spoilers. That just as they undermined the JCPOA, just as they undermined Joe Biden in 2021 by attacking Natanz, and just as they undermined the American-Iranian negotiations last year by kicking off the 12-day war, and then this war, which Rubio said had to be started because Israel was going to do it anyway. So until an American government can actually prohibit Israel from doing things, as Donald Trump said he would on Friday, until you have an American government that says to Israel, you know what, no, learns how to say no to Israel, we will be back in this. We're just kicking the can down the road.
Is there anything Trump would do where you'd give him credit? Anything at all?
Resigning, apologizing, going to play golf.
Anything realistic at all? And it was something on the other side.
I mean, another hypothetical. Like, he's a deal maker, right? He's a deal maker. For example, when he in his first term, I did praise him. I wrote a piece. I got attacked for writing a piece for the Intercept when he was doing a deal to end the Afghan war. Then he didn't end it, but Joe Biden ended up taking his deal and implementing it, and then getting attacked for it. So, look, if he's willing to end wars, sure, I'll give him credit. But he turned out, as some of us warned he would, to be a massive warmonger. And I think that's the problem. I don't see any light on the horizon. I wish I had your optimism, Murray. I wish it would make my life much easier.
Mehdi, absolute pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, brother. All right, everyone. We've got Trita Parsi, a regular on the show, joining in a few minutes. So while we're waiting for Trita Parsi to join, I'll give you guys an update and let me know what you think in the comments on my discussion now with Mehdi Hasan on Israel's role in all this, and whether you agree with my optimism or his pessimism. So we've got Arachi here. Blockading Iranian ports is an act of war, and thus a violation of the ceasefire. Striking a commercial vessel, I read that just now, and taking its crew hostage is an even greater violation. Iran knows how to neutralize restrictions, how to defend its interests, and how to resist bullying. So Ghalibaf made a similar statement. We're seeing similar statements across Iran, across their negotiating team, and also the media as well, the media in Iran. And it shows that they're all aligned. There's no I've talked about splits, but I think the splits are more disagreements rather than actual splits within Iran. They all agree that the blockade needs to be lifted. I think that's their position. Now, Trump, as I said earlier as well, Trump did say that he's open for, according to the New York Times, that he's open for J.D. Vance to go to Iran, to go to Pakistan for the negotiations if Iran's stance changes. Now, I think the people that are calling the shots right now and what happens next in the negotiations based on all the developments is the Iranians, is Mujtaba Khamenei. And Trump, they're putting Trump in a really difficult position, but I hope a deal is reached behind the scenes, and I think it will be reached, where there'll be some sort of agreement that the US will lift the blockade. I think Iran is looking for some guarantees that the US will lift the blockade, at least in the next 24 hours, if a deal is to be had. Or maybe Iran accepts to give the US some concessions. Now, if Iran is asking Trump to lift the blockade and they're not giving him any concessions, that would be really concerning, because they're essentially telling him, hey, we're ready to go back to war. They're forcing him into war, because that would be just a humiliating defeat for Trump to lift the blockade and Iran not to give him anything at all to kind of justify him lifting the blockade, because that just shows massive weakness. Now, the Prime Minister of Lebanon as well, who's with Macron as we speak, Macron made a statement. So Macron said he's threatening, after his meeting with the Prime Minister of Lebanon, he's threatening to cut the 1995 EU-Israel agreement if Israel, quote, doesn't change their policy. And there's been increasing rhetoric in the EU to break that pact and that policy when it comes to Israel. So the EU seems to be acting. We talked about the tide is shifting. We're starting to shift first in the EU, and I hope we see the same thing in the US under this administration, but I think it's almost guaranteed in the next administration. I'd be surprised if we don't see the tide shift. The Lebanese Prime Minister made a statement saying he wants all IDF troops to be removed from Lebanon's territory, alongside the return of all war prisoners within the context of the talks with Israel. He also indicated Lebanon needed around 500 million euros in humanitarian aid. Israel's wars keep destroying countries in Gaza. They need $70 billion to rebuild. So that came in from France. You've got the report that came in from CNN that's very concerning. Me and the previous guest, Glenn Diesen, were just talking about it. And that's very, very significant. That's pretty major for the war. It just shows why Trump needs, one of the reasons why Trump needs to off-ramp as soon as possible. Over roughly 7 weeks, the US is estimated to have used about 45% of its precision strike missiles, at least half of its THAAD interceptors, and nearly 50% of its Patriot missiles, according to assessments aligned with Pentagon data. And we've talked about this a lot on the show. I just didn't, I know some people have mentioned those numbers, but those are pretty substantially higher than I would have expected. It has also expended around 30% of its Tomahawk missiles, which I've talked about, and over 20% of several other advanced systems. While officials say the current supplies are still sufficient for ongoing operations, experts warn they may not be enough to handle a conflict with near-peer adversary like China. They're sufficient for ongoing operations. Of course, they're sufficient, but the goal is to have enough stockpiles for any future war. Hezbollah just made a statement. In a statement, Hezbollah's announcement it targeted an Israeli artillery emplacement in Kfar Giladi. It was targeted with rockets and a swarm of attack drones in response to repeated violations of the ceasefire. So Hezbollah has responded. We're seeing a very different Iran, a very different Hezbollah in this war. Previously in the war, whenever Israel attacked Hezbollah did not respond. Iran did not respond. What we're seeing right now is Iran made it clear that if there's no ceasefire in Lebanon, there will be no ceasefire in Iran. That was a position very clearly, which shows how emboldened they are, and they know they're in a stronger position. And Hezbollah is acting the same way. They've just attacked Israel in the midst of a ceasefire at a time they were, a few months ago, whenever Israel attacked them, they would bomb them on an almost daily basis. Hezbollah would not respond. So already we're seeing a massive shift in the region. I just really hope that shift does not mean the IRGC would put Trump in a position forcing him back into a war. I really hope they don't go that far. I don't think they will. I really think they're a lot more strategic than that. The IRGC airspace commander just now, Sayed Mousavi, if from now on, that came in just a few seconds ago, if from now on the army makes a mistake and attacks this pure land, this time our target will be wherever you say. Iran's southern neighbors should know that if their geography and facilities are used by enemies to attack the Iranian nation, they must say goodbye to oil production in the Middle East region. That gives you an idea of what Iran will do if they're attacked again. The threats are very clear, and I think they'll deliver on those threats. Let's go back to other pieces of news. We have, so that's the statement I said earlier. Trump said Vance's trip could resume at short notice if Iran responds in a way Trump deems acceptable, because that trip, according to multiple sources, has been cancelled and has been confirmed that it's been cancelled as well. We've got an Israeli analyst right now. It kind of gives you an idea of the mindset in Israel. Mehdi Hasan is warning that Israel is in a very different mindset to the US. Well, this is what Israel is saying right now, according to an analyst there on their TV. As I understand it, there is no issue here of an Iranian attempt to stall for time. This is not a negotiation where time can be dragged out. The expiration date of the ceasefire is well known to everyone. Well, before I continue reading that statement, Trump did say something similar earlier. He does not want to extend the ceasefire. Now, whether he means it or not, we'll see, because Iran said something very similar. They refused to extend the ceasefire as well. So then the analyst continues. There is a substantive and clear position here from the leadership in Tehran, led by the IRGC. There will be no negotiations if the Americans do not compromise in one way or another on the issue of the naval blockade. This does not necessarily mean that they want to return to fighting, but it seems they are also not afraid of it. They are all well aware of the accumulating economic damage resulting from the continuation of the naval blockade, yet they still assess that Iran has the ability to bear the economic price, or at least several months where the other side, the US and the global economy and the Gulf, has the ability to hold out for only for a few more weeks. It's a very good analysis. Very, very good point. That Iran knows Trump cannot continue this war. I've said this a lot. The Gulf cannot sustain this. The Gulf cannot have their energy infrastructure bombed. And Iran could cause significantly more damage in the Gulf. I know a lot of people are criticizing them striking the UAE, striking Kuwait, striking Saudi, striking even Oman and Qatar and Bahrain. We saw what they could do to the gas fields in Qatar. It was it wasn't that big of an attack. It was a limited strategic attack on infrastructure owned by ExxonMobil in Qatar. It wasn't the infrastructure that was owned. So the gas field is massive. And I think that the facilities they struck were owned by ExxonMobil, not Qatari, the national fund or sovereign wealth fund of Qatar that owned the assets that were struck. It was a very, very precise strike on the assets that were owned by ExxonMobil to show you their capabilities. So if they decide to retaliate against the Gulf again, they could cause significantly more damage. And they've made the threat, like the threat that they've made of closing the Yanbu pipeline in Saudi, the Fujairah oil facility in the UAE, the Houthis closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Remember when the Houthis joined the war, everyone was up in arms. They're going to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They could strike a lot of Saudi infrastructure as well, energy infrastructure, including the Yanbu pipeline. I'll get Malcolm Nance on tomorrow to discuss that threat, because along with the Strait of Hormuz, that's a third of global oil supply. The markets would, oil would reach numbers that hasn't reached throughout the entire war if this continues and Iran responds as they've threatened. I'll continue reading this analysis, very accurate analysis by this Israeli analyst. The implication is that at this stage, it seems the chance of resuming talks depends to a large extent on the Americans' willingness to at least ease the naval blockade, even if not officially. I agree. In exchange for resuming the talks, which will probably require, nevertheless, an extension of the ceasefire by at least a few more days. I agree with that statement. Khan Yuz, Israeli national broadcaster, said in Israel, preparations are underway for the resumption of fighting against Iran. A senior security official said, quote, "We assess that no understandings will be reached and are prepared for the immediate resumption of the war." Again, it's really difficult to tell whether they mean this, whether they are preparing for war, which they could be, and whether that shows the intent of them wanting to go back into war, and how ready are they for the war, how willing are they to join back into war, because that could also indicate just a way to Trump went as far as using the madman theory to try to get Iran to concede by saying that he's going to wipe out a civilization. Iran's going to use a similar strategy. Not make the comments by Iran is not as extreme as obviously wiping out a civilization, but wiping out the energy infrastructure in the Gulf is pretty significant. We attacked so IDF said IDF has said they've also attacked platforms where Hezbollah launched rockets. So there've been strikes between Israel and Hezbollah. Who attacked who first? My bet would be on Israel attacking first. I could be wrong. And there's another confirmation here from the Wall Street Journal. Iran's position is very clear. They will only send a delegation to Islamabad if the naval blockade is lifted. So we're going to see again, this is another example of who blinks first. And remember, Ghalibaf did say earlier, there's been earlier today, last night, Trump, by imposing a siege and violating the ceasefire, seeks to turn this negotiating table in his own imagination into a table of surrender or to justify further renewed warmongering. We do not accept negotiations under the shadow of threats. Now, it's important to go back to who is making the decisions. I've talked about this guy before. That's the guy you should really listen to and what statements he makes or what reports, any reports that refer to him and what he's deciding or what he's indicating. Ahmad Vahidi, he's the new head of the IRGC, the new chief of the IRGC, and he's got a pretty long history of attacks on, he's been part of the Buenos Aires Jewish center bombing that killed 85 people in 1994. Argentina had an Interpol red notice on him back then. He ran the Quds Force before Soleimani. So that's a very significant person within the IRGC. And if you want to use the word hardline, he's a hardliner for sure. And he's the one calling the shots right now. And we're seeing everyone else abide by his position from the statements of Ghalibaf, the president, and Arachi. There's also reports according to an anti-regime, anti-Iranian government publication that Ghalibaf is worried he could be removed as parliament speaker. He's concerned that Arachi could also be pushed out of office. And they say the IRGC is using state TV and mobilizing hardliners to kill any agreement with the US. So we may be seeing with Iran, and that could also be just a bluff to pressure the US or to confuse the US. But we are seeing indication that there is disagreements or a power struggle within Iran. And that's normal. You see that in every government, but it seems to be more than that. Remember the leak guys that I posted about a couple of days ago where the IRGC Navy, there was a recorded where they were criticizing Arachi or saying they're not going to abide to Arachi's tweet to open the Strait of Hormuz. And they will only listen to the supreme leader. So it shows two things. There is a disagreement, but more importantly, the IRGC is strongly in control of Iran. They're the ones with the weapons, and they still hold power. Iran's president, according to another report, CNN now, Iran's president is breaking from the hardliners. The war needs to end and fast, according to Pezeshkian. He says continuing the conflict, quote, benefits no one, not us, not the other side, not the region. Calls for, quote, every rational and diplomatic path to reduce tensions. Warns Iran faces massive reconstruction challenges once fighting stops, financing, market stability, infrastructure, says the public must be told the truth or risk losing trust in the government. Iran was already in deep economic crisis before the war. Let's not forget about this. We're talking about how Iran won this war. Iran was in shambles in January. Whether you believe there's 6,000 dead or 60,000 dead, or there were the worst protests that Iran has faced since the 1979 revolution. And the economy is in free fall, has been since January and before that because of the sanctions. The government estimates $270 billion in war damages, where they need steel, petrochemicals, and infrastructure sectors. All these sectors within Iran have been hit. Pezeshkian has no direct role in negotiations and no final say on ending the conflict. Obviously, we know the president doesn't have that much influence, especially when it comes to decisions like this. And the EU is starting to pressure people that are responsible of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. They're targeted only to individuals that are closing the Strait of Hormuz. And that's just, obviously, that's all going to be mainly within the IRGC. But they're also targeting not the IRGC as an institution, but the people themselves that are responsible in implementing the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So that's the most that Europe could do. And there's also repercussions of the shutdown. For guys that think that Iran is in a pretty good place right now, they're in a stronger place than the US. They're in a better negotiating position. But it's important to note that they also can't sustain this for much longer. By the way, Trita Parsi is joining max 7 minutes, could be before that as well. So I think he's about to join the studio to be set up. And we'll continue this conversation. And then we got Larry Johnson after Trita Parsi as well today. So according to Rudal, Iran is days away from having to shut down its oil wells. And that's expected. We said the same thing about the Gulf oil wells, and they take a long time to restart again once they shut down. It's not as easy as switching on a button on and off. With the Strait of Hormuz blocked and storage filling fast, Iran has 10 to 15 days before it has no choice but to start cutting production across its fields. Before the US closed the strait, Iran was exporting 1.85 million barrels a day, mostly to China, pulling in roughly $150 million daily. That's all gone now. The IMF is already, we've talked about this on the show before, there is alternatives that Iran could use. Extremely limited. There's one in the Gulf of Oman. They've got a port there. Very limited capabilities of being able to export from that port. And I have a feeling ships that are leaving that port as well are probably being blockaded by the US as well. I could be wrong. I'll ask you to fact check. And there's no land-based pipelines to be able to export oil to China or anywhere really. So that's the position. They don't have the facilities to export through the Caspian Sea as well. So there is no option that Iran has other than the Strait of Hormuz. So that's a choke point for the world, but a choke point for the Gulf, but more so a choke point for Iran. And the US is leveraging that card. Before the US closed the strait, the IMF is already flagging a global slowdown. Developing countries like Iraq are getting hit twice as hard as wealthier nations. And by the way, Iraq is already is talking about building alternative to the Strait of Hormuz. As I said, the repercussions of this war will be felt for many, many years to come. And physical oil is still pricing a blockade while paper markets chase every ceasefire rumor. Iran spent weeks using the strait as leverage against everyone else. Now it's the one receiving on the receiving end, and the clock is ticking. Ambassador Mike Waltz says Iran is out of money, allies, and options. That's a pretty extreme statement. The blockade is bleeding Tehran significantly. Yes, $150 million a day minimum. But we'll see what happens afterwards. We know about the cargo ship that was seized 2 days ago, I think, by the US. And I think there was another one seized earlier today, this morning. And Iran, according to some sources, launched a coordinated strike, a drone strike on multiple US warships. But, that didn't expect to cause any damage. There's no reports of any damage. Iran's vice president said, just getting an update here on Trita Parsi, he's being set up in the studio, either a free oil market for all or risky and costly one for everyone. So essentially, this is him threatening that he will be striking the Gulf, the energy infrastructure in the entire Gulf, something we've been warning about for a while. Now, there's something else important happening that no one's talking about, and that's the proxies. The Iraqi proxies played a key role in causing damage in the Gulf. They've struck a lot of the facilities in Saudi. Let me see if I can get the information on how much damage they've caused in the Saudi. There it is. Yeah, up to half of the 1,000 drone attacks on Saudi came from inside Iraq. And I'll tell you why that's important right now. And with the developments that happened in the last couple of days when it comes to Iraq, which is worrying because it shows that Iran, I don't think, is changing their policy when it comes to their proxies, except if they get very significant concessions from the US. But the preparations for a continuation of the war are definitely going on. So I'm not sure whether, again, that shows intent or that just shows precautions. But let's go back to why Iraq is important. So Iranian-backed Iraqi militias have been quietly pounding Gulf states throughout the conflict. Half of the 1,000 drone attacks on Saudi were from Iraq. Targets included the refinery at Yanbu, which is the most sensitive target in Saudi, and why Saudi's terrified of the Houthis, and why I've talked about it with Ian Bremer on the show, why they're likely paying off the Houthis right now so the Houthis don't attack Saudi. But there's only so much they could do before the Houthis, they're still aligned with Iran. So there's only so much the Saudis could push. And if we're back to war, I wouldn't be surprised if the Houthis join the war and eventually strike Saudi if the war escalates. Targets included Yanbu, as I said, Eastern Province, oil fields, and Kuwait's only civilian airport. Attacks on Bahrain, so there you go. Iraq attacked the Gulf, across the Gulf. Attacks on Bahrain continued even after Trump announced a ceasefire, and that's from Iraq. Militia Arsenal they have about 250,000 members, billions in funding, and long-range missiles. That's the Iraqi militia, which are significantly less capable than the Houthis and Hezbollah. Just give you an idea of how much havoc they can cause in the Gulf, which is another way of pressuring Trump and the global economy. The U.S. embassy in Baghdad has largely evacuated. That was constantly being struck by the militias there. Warning of more attacks to come. Iraq's government is too politically paralyzed to rein in the militias. We know that. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. The AFP, it's another interesting one here from the AFP. Iran's top shadow commander just surfaced in Baghdad for the first time since the war started. Oh, wow, okay. That's Ismail Khani. A lot of people talked about him being a traitor and being hanged. He's still alive. The head of the IRGC Quds Force. He flew to Baghdad on April 8th. His mission, pick Iran's next prime minister. He met with Shiite militia leaders and the coordination. So Iran's influence in Iraq is higher than it's been in a very long time. And the coordination framework to agree on a, quote, consensus candidate, which means Tehran is deciding on who runs Iraq, and they want it locked before the dust settles. This is Khani's first trip outside Iran since Operation Roaring Lion launched in February 28th. That hasn't been confirmed. That's been reported. I think it was in the last 2 days that it happened, reported yesterday. The fact that he left Iran now tells you how much this moment matters to Tehran. It is pretty significant because, if the ceasefire breaks tomorrow, he'd probably be early on the target list. Iran just picked, and then we talk about the prime minister that was, Iraq's prime minister that was picked, Bassem al-Badri. the significance of that. Now, there's comments coming in out of the UAE, and all this context is very important because I'm going to be discussing these with Trita Parsi in the next minute. UAE Minister of State Reem Al-Hashmi said the following: "We believe," and he's pretty aggressive towards Iran, "we believe that maximum pressure is actually what takes you forward. Dealing with the IRGC." So Trita just joined the studio now. I apologize. I thought he joined earlier. He's coming up very shortly. In a few seconds, we'll have Trita Parsi. "Ultimately, we don't want to hurt the Iranian people, but at the same time, it's the IRGC that have taken a posture not against the US and Israel alone, but against the very neighborhood they operate." He also said the onus is really on Iran to demonstrate that they are not going to be going forward in the way that the trajectory has been so far. "Trust is earned. We are not fools." He also said over 90% of all their targets were civilian infrastructure, Iranian targets. They really want to break what it was that makes the UAE special, which is the incredible model of prosperity and tolerance. "We want to have peace in our region, but can't be a bad peace. It can't be a peace that doesn't address the root causes. Being able to weaponize the Strait is really serious tool to hurt cities from Damwan to Delhi in spiking on fuel prices and spiking up food prices. They don't have the right to do that." So that's by the UAE state minister. "In 40 days, we were attacked by 2,800 missiles and drones. For us, it is very clear they've chosen to go down this path because because we're everything there or not." So these are statements to show that at least based on these statements, the UAE is still very critical of Iran. I do think the UAE and other Gulf countries will have to eventually align. I'm not saying align as in build an alliance with Iran, but have to coexist with Iran. And they have to come to some sort of conclusion, because I think all countries involved don't want conflict. It wasn't Iran that started this war, and Iran is warned if they're attacked by the US, they will strike the Gulf. So all the red flags were there for the war that should never have happened. I think the Gulf countries will be in a position, depending on what happens next, that they must be in agreement directly with Iran, one of coexistence. And we saw a completely different statement by the former advisor to the president of the UAE, to MBZ. And he said that he believes that US bases should be removed from the UAE and they're no longer necessary. That was about 3 days ago. So, mixed signals from the UAE. But let's get Trita's thoughts on all this. Trita, I was just talking to you about you a couple of hours ago I remember on our show when you were telling me months and months ago when Netanyahu was visiting Trump, you're like, Mario, the decision, we talked right after that visit, you're like, Mario, the decision to attack Iran has already been made. I think in early January, you told me this. It's a matter of when. And you told me afterwards, we had another interview. You said, Mario, these protests are just speeding up the inevitable. A war between the US and Iran will happen, but it's going to happen sooner than expected because of the protests. It kind of shows that the US sees this as an opportunity to cause regime change. And here we are. So now everyone's trying to figure out what these negotiations mean. The audience knows my position really well. I've repeated it a lot. I'm pretty optimistic that both sides want an end, but I'm the most worried today that I've been since the ceasefire started. What's your analysis of what we're seeing right now?
I think, I don't remember when we talked last, Mario, but I think I may have mentioned it already then, that we have been witnessing a remarkable self-sabotage by Trump himself of his own diplomacy. And that we're seeing that this effort to kind of coerce the other side, the manner in which he uses social media, not just to put forward a narrative of his own victory, which is understandable, but to make sure that that narrative is humiliating to the other side, has completely backfired and has really raised question marks on the Iranian side as to whether Trump is serious, and if he is, whether he actually can negotiate and deliver on it. I'm still hoping that eventually we will see some diplomacy coming out of this. But what we have seen in the last couple of days is that this effort to humiliate and try to create the optics of winning has taken precedent, and it has led to real escalation by both sides, the taking of the tanker and other measures that is now very difficult to walk back. But it seems like it's going to be necessary to walk it back in order to get to talks. But then the talks will start under the worst possible circumstances, instead of a degree of momentum being built up by some give and take in the time between the two physical meetings as a result of the Pakistanis helping. That momentum has now been completely replaced by this mutual anger that has emerged over the last couple of days. And that's not a good starting point for negotiations.
So pressing you on that question again, I know they're in a bad position, and I feel both sides are doing the other side a disservice. Trump trying to humiliate Iran, but I don't see that. I think his rhetoric has changed a lot recently. He's, today in a statement, he's giving them the olive branch, like things he wouldn't usually say. Where is it? From wiping out a civilization to now saying, where is it? Iranians want to make a good deal. I don't want to be rushed. No, that's not it. There was a statement where he made that Iranians have a chance to seek peace. And they have a chance. Okay, there it is. Iran can get themselves in a very good footing if they make a deal. That was earlier today. They can make themselves into a strong nation again, a wonderful nation again. They have incredible people. They have to use reason. They have to use common sense. Now, I understand him enforcing that blockade. You could see that was, might have been a bad strategy in the midst of negotiations. But look what Iran is doing as well. Iran has the Strait of Hormuz closed, had it closed for a while, and they're still charging a fee at the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you might say this is justified after the war. But I just feel like this is purely negotiating tactics. And from a rhetoric perspective, he's changed a lot from the rhetoric we're seeing now.
It changes
a few days ago.
It changes day by day. And I think it's important to understand that the original tweet from Maraqchi that the Strait would be open was supposed to be a positive step that Trump was supposed to reciprocate.
Yeah.
Instead, he escalated by saying, I'm not lifting the blockade. Okay. And that's what set everything off on a negative direction. I agree with you that some of the things he's saying right now are good. It would be good if we could keep it that way. But a lot of damage has been created in between. And yes, the Iranians have stopped some ships. The Iranians have not confiscated a ship. There's not a UAE ship or a Chinese ship or whatever ship that is in the custody of Iran in which the Iranians have blown up the engine of. So I do think we have to recognize that this escalation got out of control and that this is a very typical thing that I've seen in other American administrations as well. They really think that their coercive power is what moves the needle, whereas in reality, at least with the Iranians, it's been their ability to offer flexibility that generates flexibility from the Iranian side. So their offer of sanctions relief is going to be far more effective in getting the Iranians to show flexibility than to go and blow up a ship or take it in custody, etc. So I'm not saying that some coercive measures as a part of a negotiation is not necessary at times. It is. But when your entire negotiation strategy is centered on the coercive element, then usually you don't end up in a successful negotiation. You end up in a self-fulfilling prophecy of escalation, getting out of control. And that's what I think we're seeing here. I see some efforts to walk it back, etc. The question is if it's too late. And it's in the midst of all of this, of course, reinforce this mistrust between the two sides. I mean, take a look at what the Iranians are doing right now. Promises from the US is not sufficient for them to come to the table. They didn't want a promise of a ceasefire in Lebanon. They wanted to see that Trump stopped Israel from attacking Beirut, which he did, in order for them to continue the negotiations. And right now, it seems like some concrete measure from Trump is going to be necessary in order for them to come, not just the promise of it. I do note that it appears that a large number of, or at least 12 ships on the Iranian side have transited through the Strait and not been blockaded by the US, whether that is a deliberate effort by the US to say, okay, we're not going to announce that the blockade is off, but in practice it is.
When did that happen?
It has happened in the last 24 hours.
12 ships.
12 ships, if I'm not mistaken. Lloyd's had an article about it.
That's pretty significant.
Yes, and again, it's unclear to me whether this is because the blockade was never fully blockaded. It was very porous from the outset. And it's not clear to me if this is just a continuation of that porousness.
When did those 12 Iranian ships go through the Strait of Hormuz?
As I understand it, it's been in the last day.
Okay. So that could be a concession. I've asked the team as well to look for it. That's
exactly.
Really
it could be a concession, but I want to emphasize, remember, this blockade was never airtight from the outset. This may just be the continuation of the porous manner in which this blockade has been pursued from the outset, which most of it was for show. Or it may be a deliberate signal without any announcement that the US is kind of backing off. We'll see. But hopefully this episode will be contained and real talks will begin. But even then, let's say that we do manage to get to that point, as you and I have talked about before, it's going to be very difficult to get a deal. There's no guarantee whatsoever that a deal will be had, even if the two sides overcome the latest brouhaha.
Okay, like a lot of guests I have are pessimistic, but like your opinion matters a lot to me, considering how you've been right a lot of times in this in the analysis on this war. So you're pessimistic that a deal will be had.
Look, I think I said it on the show before. I put it at 25%, which probably is relatively high.
Fuck.
What I'm really concerned about here is that to make a deal at this point, I don't believe that it is impossible. I don't believe that there isn't a pathway. I think the Iranians will, in the right deal, give up the 60%, have no stockpile within their own territory. In fact, in Geneva, that was essentially part of the deal. But it will require massive sanctions relief. In fact, I think the Iranians will ask for all sanctions to be lifted. Primary sanctions, secondary sanctions, and UN sanctions. The ones that I think they may show some flexibility on is secondary sanctions. Because at the end of the day, if primary sanctions are lifted, most of the secondary sanctions will become hollow or wither away. But part of the, but you know, and I think frankly, Trump is the president that would be like totally okay with lifting sanctions. He's not a fan of sanctions. Yeah. He's a fan of tariffs because that hits the other side, but sanctions tend to hit both sides, including American companies. But sanctions relief is the hardest thing for the Israelis to accept. They want, as part of this whole ordeal, to weaken Iran, to eliminate it from the geopolitical chessboard, degrade it for decades to come. You can do that in two different ways. You can have a war that can degrade the country in a relatively fast fashion, or you can have this continuous grinding and destruction of its industrial base through these comprehensive sanctions. And it's bad enough for the Israelis that the war has ended. The fact that they would then go along with sanctions being lifted and a deal being struck, I just think that they will put forward the strongest possible opposition that we have yet seen from the Israelis vis-a-vis Trump, which means that Trump would have to have his biggest fight yet against Miriam Adelson, against Mark Levine, against Netanyahu, and all of these other interests that tend to be more aligned with the Israeli perspective on matters. And it's not that I don't believe that he can win that fight. It's whether I believe that he is willing to have that fight, given that that political capital will be spent on this, but cannot then be spent on a whole lot of other things.
By the way, the team found me the article about the 12 ships, 12 vessels in the last 24 hours. But the article is painting it as like it's a bad thing. Data from maritime traffic cited by NBC News reveals a significant drop in maritime activity with only 12 vessels. I think their analysis is wrong. I just find that's a weak analysis because that's more of a saying only 12 vessels. Just going back to what you're saying on the Israeli side, when you said only 25% chance that we have the ceasefire working, does that 25% include Trump walking away?
No, the walking away option to me is the most likely option. I would put it at 70%. He walks away. He doesn't get nuclear concessions. He doesn't give sanctions relief. The Iranians continue to control the strait, but they will open it to traffic in the sense that they will charge a toll, but they won't get any benefit from the straits unless they are actually opening it to traffic. That's how they manage to get the tolls. And that will push down oil prices, not as much as it otherwise could have, of course. But I think the American side has already concluded, deal or no deal, the Iranians are going to control the straits. That's part of the reason why the US proposal in Islamabad a week or so ago actually was for the US to be part of the mechanism and get a percentage of those tolls. That tells you a lot that the US side essentially has kind of moved in the direction of recognizing that this is more or less a fait accompli. It's on the margins that things can be changed there.
What a catastrophic war. What a stupid, crazy war. And how if Trump does a deal, I swear, if he does a deal where he shares a percentage of the tolls, he deserves an award for the best business deal of our generation. And that will be catastrophic for Israel. Israel would go crazy. I can just imagine Netanyahu losing his shit, seeing that happen. That would be mental. But do you think the Iranians would accept it? Because that could be... So Trump's blockade would be them, maybe him pressuring them to cut him into the deal. That would be, maybe could be a strategy.
So the Iranians rejected it in Islamabad last time. I do believe, however, that there are potential variations of it that they would be open to. Potentially making sure that the percentage of the tolls are paid in dollars instead of yuan, which would essentially benefit the petrodollar. Alternatively, instead of giving the US 5%, the Iranians could agree that 5% of the income would be spent by the Iranians on buying American products. That would actually have a win for the Iranians in two ways. One, they would get the US in on the mechanism. But secondly, for them to buy American products means that the US needs to lift primary sanctions. So I can see them playing with some of these different variables. I think there's a room for creativity. Of course, a lot of other countries will be very upset. Europe, Asian countries, I mean, particularly the Asian countries, they had nothing to do with this. They didn't lobby the US to go to war, as some of the GCC states did, at least at some point. They didn't snap back sanctions on Iran at the UN as the Europeans did. But they not only going to end up paying these tolls, but also then see the US potentially get a percentage one way or another of these tolls. So I think you're going to see, you said that this was disastrous. I personally think that some of the repercussions of this is going to be beyond what we can imagine right now, in the sense that this will have had a dramatic impact on the confidence of other countries, particularly US allies, on not only American reliability, but that the decisions the US makes actually have at least an attempt of making it positive for other countries, including the allies of the United States. I'm still struck by the fact that in the United States right now, there's very little reportage, particularly on TV, on how devastating this war has been economically for a whole set of US allies in Asia. It's not as if we're not even acknowledging that this is one of the effects of this war, because it doesn't matter to us. I find it really, really problematic, and I assume that this will weigh heavily on the minds of many of these different countries going forward.
Agree. And the Gulf have been so screwed by this.
Certainly.
What a horrible time to be one of the leaders that is stuck in this position right now.
I agree. I think they're in a very bad predicament. I do think that there was an expiration date, just as much as there's an expiration date for the American security umbrella for Europe. There was an expiration date as well, perhaps even a sooner expiration date for the American security umbrella for the GCC. It wouldn't necessarily end in this shocking manner, but it would have ended at some point. And the GCC states should have been quite aware of this.
It hasn't only ended, it's not only ended, it's ended, and it's reaffirmed Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. Like, before you could question it, if Iran tries to close the Strait of Hormuz, the US Navy will reopen it. The Gulf countries would form an alliance with Europe. But after this war, we found out, Trump threatened to open the Strait of Hormuz militarily, then asked NATO to help, and then nothing happened. Now, after this war, it's pretty clear that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, and that's a reality that they have to live with now.
True, but let me add one element to it. You're absolutely right. I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. I think, however, we should also realize that there is a natural law of geopolitics here, that if a country like Iran gains control of a waterway in this manner, and that waterway is of such importance, then what it will naturally lead to, particularly if A, the situation remains unstable, and as a result, B, there's a likelihood that that country closes the straits at will, then you will have a massive incentive system structure for countries to start investing in alternative pipelines to circumvent the Strait of Hormuz. And that's what I think will happen here. And within the next 7 to 10 years, we're going to see a sprawling of some of these pipelines. And, the flow of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz will go down from 20% today to probably more around 10 or so percent. And that will then reduce the strategic value of that chokehold. I'm not saying it's gone entirely. That's still a very, very significant amount of traffic, but it will go down. And simultaneously, we're seeing that the Chinese, for instance, right now, are building more nuclear reactors than the entire world combined. They're doing everything. They're reacting to this reality by reducing their dependency, not just on Persian Gulf oil, but on oil. And all of these things eventually will lead to a scenario in which the strategic benefit of that control, which is extremely significant today, will start to dwindle over time.
Which maybe is more reasons why Iran should be able to charge a fee there, because there'll be a very limited amount of time they can make money off this.
Exactly.
Before it's no longer as important. That's a very interesting point. All right. So if war restarts, so you, actually, no, let me get a quick number from you, and then we'll talk about the war game, what happens next. What is the likelihood that we'll have a full-blown war again? What's your position on that?
I still find it unlikely. I know that there's a lot of folks, including on the Iranian side, that believe that Trump, at the end of the day, is amassing a lot of military force, hoping to perhaps go at war again. And their perception is, or suspicion is, that Trump would try to do some sort of a knockout strike in the next 48 hours or within a 48-hour span. And then that dramatically changes the situation. I am more skeptical of that. I don't put it at more than 5%. I do believe that the 70% scenario of no deal can deteriorate into a war inadvertently. But that's a different scenario. I'm saying that, we're talking about Trump choosing to go into war. I find that unlikely for the very simple reason that he thought that the first strike that he did on Iran, including the assassination of the supreme leader, would have been that knockout. Yeah. And that within 4 days, Iran would have capitulated or collapsed. And it didn't work out. And instead, he got stuck in a really bad war. His options are now all terrible. And he has managed within that to get a ceasefire. And he should be very happy he has a ceasefire. To gamble that away by going back into a war, again, based on some sort of a fantasy that a knockout strike is in the cards. It would be just astonishingly foolish in my view. And I think it would be very difficult for him to be able to get away with it politically if it, as it likely will, lead to not only to this situation again, but a worst version of this situation again. Because then, we're not talking about committing one mistake. We're talking about compounding that with an even greater mistake. So I'm skeptical of that scenario. I don't rule it out entirely, but I'm skeptical of it.
Yeah, we agree on. I agree with everything you've said so far. There's nothing I disagree with. Let's see on this part, though, if we disagree. What would Iran do if we do see a return to war? They've threatened to, gloves off, strike the Yanbu pipelines, strike the Fujairah oil facility, the Houthis closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, just going all out, and obviously keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed. That's about a third of global energy being disrupted, global oil supply being disrupted. So do you think they would go gloves off? Do you think there'll be an escalation ladder? How do you think they will respond?
So what we have seen so far was that not only did they counter-escalate, they did so horizontally and much faster than most people expected. The US side did not expect the closing of the Hormuz, but we also know that there is a significant amount of distance left on their escalation ladder. You mentioned several of those steps. Taking out oil infrastructure, closing the Gulf of Aden, etc. A lot of other things that they still could do that they have chosen not to do. Because ultimately that would be, even greater degree of warfare. But if the United States goes for a knockout strike within 48 hours in the next round of war, then I would suspect that that would include oil infrastructure in Iran. And we know well that the Iranians have made it very clear what they will do in that scenario. I don't think we have any reason to doubt it. And I think we will see massive amount of strikes from their end, including the Strait of Hormuz. So, again, I don't see anything that has changed the fundamental reality that Trump, despite the fact that the US is the most powerful military in the world, nevertheless, because of a combination of geography and asymmetric warfare, does not have escalation dominance. And if he believes that he does, I think he will commit an even greater mistake than actually starting this war in the first place.
Escalation dominance, for the audience, is that the other side is more worried that you will escalate instead of the other way around, and that dominance is right now with Iran. Iran escalating, taking certain steps is more worrying for Trump and the global economy than Trump escalating, because Trump has done everything to Iran already. The last one left is destroying the energy infrastructure and stuff. And I think Iran's ability, and that's what you probably mean, Iran's ability to sustain that is more than the global economy in the Gulf countries and American allies' position to be able to sustain Iranian escalation.
Whatever the US does to Iran Iran can inflict even greater damage directly or indirectly on the US in response. And the more you go down that path, the worse the US is off. That's part of the reason why Trump made a lot of threats against the oil infrastructure, against other parts of Iran, but then ended up not acting on it because his military advisors played it out, and it was very clear the US would suffer more. Not in the sense that the Iranians are not taking huge hits, but they can absorb it, whereas Trump politically cannot. Again, he has elections coming up and midterm elections in just a couple of months. He's been very lucky to get the ceasefire that pushed down oil prices somewhat. Those will go up much more in a scenario in which there's renewed warfare, particularly if within the first 72 hours that knockout blow has not come. Because even during the previous war, the markets did not allow oil prices, the paper price of oil and the actual price of oil, there was still a delta in between. And a lot of that was because the expectation in the market was Trump is going to taco at one point. He's going to pull out of this. So oil prices will then go down. There's a lot of oil stuck in the Persian Gulf. It would flood onto the market. So that kept oil prices, part of the reason why it was kept artificially lower than what it actually should have been. This time around, if there's another round, it's much more intense. It fails again. I don't think the market is going to be counting on an easy, relatively fast exit out of that war. I think they will recognize that this is going to become a much, much deeper problem.
Trita, there's something being discussed a lot, and actually the guest, Larry Johnson, is coming on in 4 minutes, and he said that according to sources of his, General Kane stopped Trump from using nuclear weapons or getting the nuclear codes. I saw some report, something along the lines. I'll ask him about it in a few minutes. And there's been multiple reports that had fears like what Tucker Carlson said, take away the nuclear codes. I was in a very different camp. I'm like, guys, I think this rhetoric is unacceptable for a president. We criticize Israel for such rhetoric. That's not right, but it's a madman theory, and he's just trying to get Iran to concede. So that rhetoric as a one-off is very different to what we're seeing in Israel. Ongoing, repeated rhetoric followed by action. So that was my position, but there seems to be some people really worried about his mental state and even the possibility of him using nukes if we're back into war. What's your position on this? I'm not sure if you've spoken about it.
So I took a lot of the noise about potential use of nuclear weapons with a massive grain of salt earlier on. There was a moment, it was around that weekend when there was these military operations trying to extract those 2 pilots in Iran. Was it 2 or 3 weekends ago? It was a moment there that I became much more worried about this, because very serious people that I know would not easily go to that conclusion started to very seriously talk about this. And the fear that there was something mentally challenging started to really become a concern. That does not necessarily mean that I know or that I believe or that I dispute what your next guest is going to say, that actually there was a moment in which he pushed for it and there was pushback. I don't know if that's true or not. But I do think that there is something that we talked about earlier on before this war, which was no one has seen Trump's psychology in a state of a longer war that is not going his way, or in a situation in which the US would have lost hundreds of American soldiers killed in action. We've just simply not been in that scenario. And as a result, we don't know exactly how Trump's psychology will be in that type of a context. I think we have now a bit more of a glimpse into it, some truly unhinged tweets, but whether that is, again, evidence that there was even serious thinking about using nuclear weapons or not, again, it would be just speculation at this point.
Those unhinged tweets, do you, again, as a final question, how worried were you when you saw them? I saw them as a clear off-ramp, and I was pretty, not happy because it's not right to speak that way, but kind of relieved. What was your position? Did
I wrote really that same day when it came. I wrote that same day that when it came out that this could very well be something that he does in order to create an off-ramp for himself. He will walk out of it. And even a lot of people would say, well, look, that was a false threat. No one's going to be like, well, now you lost credibility because you didn't use a nuclear weapon, right? So it would be a way for him to get out of the situation. I think that's more or less how it played out. But again, you can't do this in international relations in reiterated games without dramatically causing not only you, but your entire country to lose massive credibility, not just amongst your enemies and opponents, but amongst your friends as well. And that ultimately is going to be very damaging to the United States' ability to play a leadership role, even within circles of its own allies.
Trita, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
Take care, my friend.
Thank you.
Larry, you've been pretty vocal about Trump maybe using nukes. I saw, I think RT or someone put out a video about it. That's worrying. How are you, my friend? First, good to see you.
Hi there. Yeah. Well, this was, again, I can't verify, certify that the report is accurate, but it came from a source I consider reliable, not someone given to indulging in fantasy. What's fascinating is, so far, I don't think the Pentagon has moved to deny it, to say, oh, this is a bald-faced lie. Normally they would do that. I think that this goes along with Trump's, when you talk about ending civilization, the only weapon we have, which we would call a civilization ender, is the atomic nuclear bomb. So it is, I can't rule out that Trump said that or entertained that as a notion, but if the story is true, General Kane did what he's supposed to do. He said, no, sir, that's an illegal order. I'm not going to follow that. There's nothing to justify doing that. Look, the Wall Street Journal did an article 3 days ago in which they tried to explain Trump. The sources said that Trump was using these extreme expressions, like, on Easter Sunday when he said, open the damn straight, does the F-bomb on him. That they said that this was Trump's negotiating strategy, that he was trying to act like, that he was crazy and as a negotiating tactic. Let's call it the Mel Gibson move. When Mel Gibson, when he was playing Lethal Weapon, he acted crazy, sometimes as a strategy to arrest people. I don't buy that. And the reason I don't buy that is then when you look at the other things that Trump is saying and doing, he's not in negotiations with Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or Alex Jones or Megyn Kelly or the Pope. He is popping off and saying the most outrageous, offensive things and accusing them of being stupid, accusing them of being low IQ. What does that gain you? If you're saying that I'm going to act crazy as a negotiating strategy, so people will do what? Run away from you in fear?
No, usually when you're worried, when you think the other side could be erratic, you start to worry. You're going to remember the Cold War days between Russia and the US, where both sides were trying to figure out what the other side was thinking and whether they're going to be rational. So it's like the fear of Trump losing his mind could maybe force Iran to concessions as well, to accept an off-ramp, to accept concessions on the negotiations.
Why would it do that?
Because they're worried that he would bomb the hell out of their infrastructure or potentially nuke them.
Well, they're gonna bomb the hell out of them and nuke them anyway. I mean, look, this mythology that this is about trying to get Iran's nuclear weapons program under control, that is a complete red herring. That is nonsense. That's not what this is about. This is about ultimately getting regime change so that the United States has a puppet in Iran that will do its bidding. The nuclear stuff is just an excuse. That's all it is. It's an excuse for war. But Iran now realizes it holds enormous leverage, and the ability of the United States. The United States doesn't have unlimited ability to, quote, destroy Iran. We saw the U.S. attempt with Vietnam well before your time. World War II, Again, bombing of Germany as a way to force the Germans to surrender. Didn't work then. So there are limits to air power, and the United States has no good options with ground forces or with the Navy. I mean, it keeps its ships far enough away from shore that it doesn't get hit with cruise missiles or short-range ballistic missiles or drones, both underwater, surface, and aerial. And with ground forces, how the hell do you get them inserted? I mean, where would you insert ground forces?
All of them are catastrophic. All of them are just a bad idea.
Yeah,
that's why they haven't gone ahead with it.
Yeah,
I think it's a very clear bad idea. But what's Iran's position in all this? Because they seem to be putting their foot down more than they did before. I think emboldened by my worry is always them being emboldened could also pressure Trump. Look, Trump didn't respond well to Arachi opening the Strait of Hormuz. My previous guest said that as well. He's like, Mario, Trump had an opportunity when Arachi announced the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. He could have responded in kind. That would have been the right thing to do if they really call it a win. So it's like Iran giving him an off-ramp and Trump didn't take it. It's a very valid point. Yeah. But it seems also the ones that they make the decisions on the Iranian side, what's the guy's name? The head of the new chief of the IRGC, who's the one that's really calling the shots behind the scenes. He's seen Ahmad Vahidi. They seem to also be putting their foot down as well. They seem to be less lenient than they were before. More. I don't say more radical. There's nothing radical about what they're doing, but less open for bullshit. Less open for Israel breaking the ceasefire. Less open for the US blockading them, and that's a bit worrying. That could drag us back into conflict, whether it's justified or not.
Oh no, we're going back in. The United States is going to start bombing again. Israel will attack. So this isn't. I think Iran is playing it exactly right up to this point. They're not acting preemptively. They're waiting until they are attacked, but they're on a hair trigger. The minute there are launches headed in their direction, then Iran's going to reach out and start taking out. They'll take out the electric infrastructure, and let's see how the folks in Dubai do with no air conditioning. And
I'm hot. I'm back. I'm in Dubai. I'm hot right now with the air conditioning on. So the last thing I want is my air conditioning off, Larry.
Yeah. I mean, that's
the threat. But the threat is significant there. Sorry to interrupt you. The threat is significant. Iran said if there's a return to war, they'll strike the Yanbu power plant, the Fujairah oil facility, and the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait will be closed by the Houthis. So Iran has made it clear that this time around, the response will be gloves off. And that's 30, along with the Strait of Hormuz, that's a third of global energy. Yeah. So Iran's response is, at least based on their threat, they're not, very different to the Iran at the beginning of the war, or even before this war. And that worries me.
Yeah, I saw a friend of mine suggested that the IRGC is acting outside of what Khamenei, the Mojtaba Khamenei wants to do. And I had to remind him, I said, dude, Khamenei was a member of the IRGC. He fought as a 17-year-old, as an 18-year-old with the IRGC. Those were his buddies. The guys that are now, here we are almost 49 years later. So guys who are 55, 56, 57, 58 years of age that are IRGC, they're his contemporaries. He's not going to sell them out at all. This is, I think there's been a myth pushed in the West that there's some great division within the Iranian government. I think that's nonsense. But prove it. Well, what happened?
Just said Iran has informed the American side they will not be attending the negotiations on Wednesday.
Yeah. They were very clear. Lift the blockade, lift the sanctions, we'll show up. Keep the blockade intact, sanctions? No, we're not going to show up. So, people make this. I've seen the same sort of nonsense with the Russians in terms of their negotiating position. There was always they'll agree to a ceasefire in place, or no, they wouldn't. They've made it very clear. The 4 areas that they annexed, then the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, that's theirs. They're not giving it up. And so Iran's made the same point. Here are our 10 points. These are the starting point. You want to negotiate with us, fulfill these 10 things. And apparently the administration initially said yes, and then Trump didn't focus on it, didn't read it. J.D. Vance said yes, and then boom, Trump reverses it 180 degrees.
I want to go back to the point, the risk of using nukes. We've talked about this throughout the war. Can you give me your thoughts on how significant is that risk on the Israeli side, the Iranian side, some dirty bomb, and on the American side, especially with Trump's recent comments? Because it seems like this is something that worries you.
Well, if either country were to use nukes to a level to, quote, destroy Iran, and with the radiation and such, would make it almost uninhabitable. So whatever utility you would have from thinking you're going to get control of gas and oil fields, they might be contaminated in ways that you cannot use it for a long time. So that, that's smart. Let's further reduce the supply of oil and gas in the world. That'll work out well on the global economy. The use of a nuclear device, it's a tactic. It's not a strategy, because it'll kill a lot of people, and like I said, it can contaminate an area, depend on how many you use. The reality is, Iran is so big. Yeah, you could knock out certain centers, but that's no guarantee that then the United States could cobble together a large enough army to go land and take control of the place. So you got to step back and say, what is the strategic purpose? And within that, do you think China and Russia are just going to stand by and let somebody use a nuke? Pakistan, let someone use a nuke like this? Yeah, so it's one of those things that sits in the back of the mind, but in terms of actually being able to use it in a practical fashion where you can say, if we drop this bomb, this is going to be the result. This will help us achieve this strategic goal. I don't see the strategic goal as feasible with that.
But so you've been very critical of Trump's mental state. Tucker's shown very similar concerns on his show. He's been one of the more vocal people about it. Alex Jones and others have had similar concerns as well. How worried are you about that? And
I'm very
linking that to the nukes.
Yeah, no, I'm very worried. That is, Trump could give that order, and it's going to be up to somebody in the Pentagon to say no, like reportedly General Kane did the other day. Trump, he's, his wild card style of negotiation, make an extreme position and then, take back off from it a little bit. That when he was in full possession of his faculties, say, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, fine, that was a reasonable strategy. But right now, he has lost that critical thinking ability, because step back and evaluate this. You've got all of these people that were your supporters that have they have large podcasts, like yourself. When you look at the audience that Candace Owens has, the audience that Tucker Carlson has, right there between them, it's about 11 million people. That's not inconsequential. Joe Rogan's like at 20 million. Alex Jones, I forget how, he's up several million. And so you've got this podcast universe, and then you get to, I'll call it tier 2. It's not to say that they're not important, but the ones that are in the like the Judge Napolitano range, up to, he's almost to 1 million now. Or there's a guy, Valhalla VFT, a former Green Beret special forces guy, but and then Dave Smith, who's a comedian. When you alienate all that group and you decide that your approach is to attack, not to how can I get these people to support me? How can I build support? If you're thinking critically, you go just, it's not like, how many people can I drive away? How many people can I attack? And that's where I'm saying the lack of judgment now, that he can't distinguish between friend and foe. And his attacks on Marjorie Taylor Greene, his attacks on Thomas Massie, because watch what's going to happen to Massie when he'll be reelected, and probably be reelected by a significant margin. I think Democrats will come out of their way to vote for him. But this guy he's running against, Ed Galron, I know Ed, Fast Eddie. He was a Navy SEAL. Not widely liked within the SEAL community, but he doesn't have the brain power that Massey does. So, but this whole strategy, when you look at Trump trying to alienate so many people, and the game of politics is getting support, building networks, so you've got a momentum, you've got all these people behind you, and it really raises the question that the information in the Epstein files may be so damaging that he can't he'll go to any lengths to keep that quiet.
There's a full statement by the IRGC. Let me see. I'll read it quickly, see if there's anything that stands out for you. Iran has formally notified the US through Pakistan mediators that will not attend Wednesday's scheduled negotiations in Islamabad, with no timeline set for future rounds, according to Tasnim news agency. The decision that follows... Oh, no, sorry, this isn't analysis. The full statement is the following. My apologies. There it is. Iran, that's according to Tasnim, the full statement. Iran's decision not to attend in Pakistan on Wednesday is final. What's the reason? According to the information obtained by Tasnim reporter, quote, 1, despite all the media buildup and speculation by US officials and outlets, the Iranian negotiating team has, for various reasons, informed the American side via a Pakistani intermediary that it will not attend the talks on Wednesday. At present, there is no clear outlook for participation in negotiations at all. Relevant sources believe the reason is as follows. After Pakistan entered as a mediator and requested a ceasefire on behalf of the Americans, Iran accepted a ceasefire and subsequent negotiations based on a 10-point framework it had proposed, which was accepted by the US. Pakistan explicitly conveyed that the US had accepted this framework. However, shortly afterwards, the following day, what Iran describes as US breaches of commitments began. First, by what is described as a complete violation of its commitments, the US did not impose a ceasefire in Lebanon on Israel, which created serious obstacles for several days. Additionally, during the first round of Islamabad talks, the US raised numerous additional demands that effectively contradicted the initial framework, leading to the negotiations into a complete deadlock. From this perspective, despite setbacks on the battlefield, the US appeared to believe it could compensate for them through maximalist demands at the negotiating table. In any case, a few days after the Islamabad talks, following what is described as a definitive Iranian threat of a missile strike on Israel, the US was compelled to implement the ceasefire in Lebanon. After that, Iran's Foreign Minister Rachi announced that Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping with the framework of the original ceasefire agreement. However, this move was immediately met, according to the report, with what Iran views as hostile US actions, including the continuation of a claimed naval blockade. Claimed naval blockade, keyword. In recent message exchanges over the past few days, the US has not backed down from what are described as excessive demands or positions seen as contrary to Iran's fundamental rights, and no meaningful progress has been achieved. For this reason, Iran ultimately announced today that under these conditions, participation in negotiations would be a waste of time, as the US is seen as obstructing any viable agreement. Therefore, Iran will not engage. This has been communicated today via the Pakistani intermediary, and Iran will not attend the Pakistan talks tomorrow in order to fully safeguard what it describes as the rights of its people.
Yeah. I mean, this is Iran is in the strongest negotiating position. They've got the chokehold on the world economy, and the full effects of that they're starting to be felt this week. And just watching, I was checking out the stock market, the Dow Jones. It's now fallen almost 500 points since this announcement. And Trump was being pumped up, and the same with oil prices. They're claiming, we got it, we're near. Oh man, the deal is we're right on the cusp. Just all we got to do is cross the T, and we're done. And it was all bullshit. I mean, it was just blatant lies by Trump. None of it was true. And Iran was very clear in its position. This is what we want. This is what we expect. Do this. And if you don't do it, then we're not going forward. Iran, I think, was anticipating this. They've been heavily mining the Strait of Hormuz over the last couple of days, I'm told. So, in great volume. So, the United States, the reality is the United States does not have a good military option to get the straits open. It has, I really say it has no military option that is could be carried out without a significant loss of life and equipment. And it would require a land invasion. And then when you get to talk about a land invasion, you have to deal with the issue of how the hell do you get your troops on land? Understand that, they got the 82nd Airborne, but you can only, on the largest plane they'd probably fly would be the C-130. I doubt they'd do it out of a 141. That is a larger aircraft. I think that can carry twice the load that a C-130 can. But a C-130 can carry only 90 paratroopers with combat loads. So, just do the math. If you're going to drop 2,000 guys down, you're going to have 22 C-130s. Because if you want them to drop about the same time, well, and then you get that kind of mass formation in the air, good Lord, talk about a sit and duck for air defense. And the United States only has 330, 350 of those C-130s. So there you're talking about close to using up about 8% of your total force. So an air assault really isn't an option. And the only other way is a maritime assault. And to get a maritime assault, you got to get your ships close to shore. So really, the United States has no easy way that it could put ground troops in action. So, rule out the whole ground force nonsense. It can maybe run a special operations raid, but even that comes at significant risk.
Why can't Trump just walk away? Which I think what will happen. I still believe that will happen. But that's the best solution. Like Joe Kent told me this. Trita Parsi just said that as well, that he thinks that's the most likely scenario. Joe Kent said it's the best scenario right now, the best case we could do. Ehud Olmert, who I spoke to earlier, said, that could probably be the only way to solve this. It's like, don't you agree that's the only option available and that's the best option even for him?
Yeah,
the continuation of the war is just catastrophic, Larry. Yeah,
he's got to step down, but he can't. He's a narcissist. He's a narcissist with early dementia. It's a deadly combination. He cannot think rationally, and anybody that challenges, this is the key. Anybody that challenges him, he lashes out at them, and basically he goes, we'll call it figuratively nuclear on them. Look at what he did to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She was a loyal supporter of his, but the only thing she did was insist that he keep his promise. He was the one that promised to have full transparency on the Epstein files and release those. But once he got into the White House, and I don't know if it was Israeli blackmail or something else, but he did a complete 180. And because she dared to support the releasing of the files, again, something he had campaigned on, he attacked her in the most vicious way, and calling her a traitor. And then when she is getting death threats, including death threats against one of her children, and she gets in touch with Trump on that, and Trump basically said, "You deserve it." Yeah. I mean, not a shred, not an ounce of empathy. That people that don't like Donald, that was not the Donald Trump of 10 years ago. Donald Trump of 10 years ago was seen as an empathetic person, one who was, I had a buddy. He was one of the most senior FedEx pilots. I mean, his employee number was under 100, and he flew with a guy that had flown for Trump, and that pilot could say he had nothing but great things to say about what a kind person Donald Trump was, and I emphasize was, because what's happening now is he's turned into like a mean drunk. He's vicious and hateful, and when he directs that hatred at people like the Pope, and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen. And again, the attacks on Candace, to calling her ugly, comparing suggesting that Brigitte Macron is some sort of, beauty. I mean, you got to wonder what's wrong with Donald Trump's eyesight, for starters. So that's why I said this. When you put all this together, there is something mentally wrong with Donald Trump. He needs to be removed from office. It's that simple.
If we're back to war, what are the military options that the US has on the table? Because that would dictate on whether Trump decides to go back into war rather than just walk away. What has been done that hasn't been done? Obviously, striking the infrastructure and stuff are threats that the US has, that Trump has made. Also, you could talk about them, the intelligence services, knowing where all the top commanders are, the ones that attended Islamabad. I'm assuming they'd be traced back. In your time at the CIA, you probably give us a better idea of how easy or difficult it is to track the people traveling from one country back to Iran. But that would give the ability for the US, not saying it's going to be effective, to do another decapitation strike.
Yeah. No, I think that entered into the calculations of the Iranian delegation or potential delegation, because they recognized last time that they had legitimate concerns that they were going to be targeted for assassination while flying out. My understanding is they flew out on Pakistani flagged planes, which would have given the U.S. and Israel pause, because you hit a Pakistani plane, Pakistan has nukes, and they could nuke Israel over that or something like that. So, the reality right now is the West Trump is trying to escape from this mistake.
Yeah,
but he can't bring himself to accept Iran's conditions. And Iran has been quite clear. They will reduce enrichment, and they will allow the nuclear facilities to be inspected. But, again, that's been the red herring. That's not the real reason that the West is so obsessed with getting rid of Iran. It is that Iran is an independent Islamic republic. Iran is not beholden. They're not the tool of any other country. They are out. They have now a relationship as almost allies with Russia and China. And they are in the process of integrating into this new financial order that is moving away from the petrodollar, moving away from dollar hegemony. So, it's a new world getting birthed, and those don't come about in peaceful ways. It's violent and bloody. But the United States can continue to launch most of the weapons they have launched have been standoff. And they're running out of their standoff weapons, like the JASSM, that can be launched, and that travels like 500 miles, or the Tomahawk. Go ahead, you were going to say?
You saw the report that came in from CNN over the 7-week war. U.S. estimated to have used 45% of their precision strike missile stockpiles. Mm-hmm. Half of them, Larry, in 7 weeks. Half of the THAAD interceptors. 50% of the Patriot missiles. I know you've been very vocal about those munitions being depleted. I think the number is higher.
Yeah, that number is wrong. It's more like 90%.
But that number already is catastrophic. Yeah. And the 30% of Tomahawks and 20% of other advanced systems. But that number, which I know you said the number is much higher, we've talked about this a few times. But even that number, which you consider a best case scenario, is really freaking bad.
Yeah. And it's not like they simply go to Lockheed Martin and say, okay, we're going to pay you more money. I mean, Patriot missiles go between $4 and $6 million a piece. We're going to give you more money, open up, work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then you can triple your production. It's not that simple. Plus, they require rare earth minerals and tungsten, which China also controls, that they don't have the materials to actually, the supply chain intact to be able to boost production dramatically. So, the United States in a very odd, this whole affair between the war in Ukraine and now this war of choice with Iran has just shown how vulnerable and weak the United States is in terms of its supply chain.
But that's why I think that Trump will walk away. I really think so. It just makes no sense otherwise.
Well, I hope you're right. But I think you're making the assumption that he's thinking rationally and logically, and that's where
we diverge. Yeah.
And that's where I think what's going on with him is it's more emotional, and when people are reacting emotionally without logic, and you try to reason with them, it's that loss of filter in the prefrontal lobe. It is significant, and there, I'm not trying to play doctor on air, but you can't help but notice this kind of change in Trump, and it is, and again, in the rule, the benchmark I'm using is how is he dealing with people that have been his supporters, and then they disagree with him on something, and he viciously attacks. He doesn't attack them on the substance. It'd be like you and I may disagree on this, but just because you say that you think Trump should walk away, I don't sit here and go, Mario, you ignorant asshole, you're stupid, you're a moron. Number one, you'd stop talking to me if I was talking that way. But number two, it doesn't. How does that help? I mean, that kind of irrational emotional outburst, it's wrong. You and I can show, hey, we can disagree on issues. We can politely disagree, and we don't have to hate each other in the process. But Trump responds with this hatred. This is not rational.
If we're back to war, how would it look like? What happens next? I'm assuming that the US would strike Iran first. Iran is more prepared. Yeah. There's been reports that even one of the cargo ships that the CENTCOM boarded was Trump called it a gift from China to Iran. We have reports that China is supplying Iran with various military equipment, air defense systems. That could be why the US, which I know you don't think the blockade is effective, but could be why the US is trying to blockade Iran, not only to choke off their economy, but maybe block China from being able to deliver certain military equipment.
But they can't, because one, you got the railroad that runs from China through Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and into Iran. So they can haul it over the railroad, they can haul it via trucks, and they can haul it via air. They don't need to do it. That's why this notion of, quote, blockading, you can blockade Cuba, all right? Cuba's an island. You can encircle it. You can genuinely blockade it. You can't blockade Iran. They got the Caspian Sea open. All Russia has.
But they can't export. The issue is they can receive military equipment. True, they can't export oil, so it will choke off their economy if this blockade is successful, because 90% comes out of the Strait of Hormuz.
That chokes off the world oil. I mean,
true.
That's like Donald Trump's taking a revolver, putting two rounds in it, spinning the chamber, and saying, "Oh, let's play Russian roulette. I'll go first." What kind? Again, the thought process. Look at the logic of this. By the second or third week of the shutoff of the Strait of Hormuz, Trump and Scott Bessent lift the sanctions on oil on Iran and Russia. Why? Because they wanted to make sure the supply stayed up, because they recognized that if the supply shrinks, it's going to have a dramatic effect on prices, which it has, and the ability of some countries to even function. It's going to cut back on maybe. So they kept that intact. And then all of a sudden, boom, we're going to take steps and policies that are going to reduce the supply of oil. In fact, Bessent last Thursday initially talked about reimposing the sanctions on Russia as well as on Iran, and indirectly on China. And then within 24 hours, they sort of reverse it. They say, well, okay, everything that's out on the sea as of April 17th, it can be delivered up until May 17th. But then we're going to, we'll impose these sanctions. So it's like, what's the policy? Are you trying to boost oil supply to try to stabilize prices? Or are you trying to cut oil supply, which is going to spike prices? Again, this is where you got this lack of coordinated, rational thinking. And I blame actually Susie Wiles a lot on this. It is the role of the chief of staff of the White House to say, this is our message, and everybody is going to adhere to it. This is This is like I call it a bad jazz band. Everybody's doing their improvisation without any harmony, without any coordination. Everybody's doing their own thing. So Scott Bessent says something on the very day that they announced that, okay, we got a ceasefire. Then Scott Bessent makes announcements that completely contradict the Iranian demands.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. That's why I said this is, I stopped thinking about this in terms of logic and rationality because it's illogical and irrational. That's what we're seeing.
You seem really upset at where we are. I don't see you upset often.
Yeah, no, this is so unnecessary. And, you know, people are going to die. And civilians, children, they're going to die. And for what? Just, you know, this need to dominate and control Iran. And again, I'm just infuriated at the lies that are being told about Iran. You know, we got this story painted that during the 1980s, Iran was on this terrific, you know, the spate of terrorism attacks between 1980 and 1988. And it was just, you know, the United States was minding its own business, and here was Iran attacking us. Well, once you look at the actual story, when you realize the United States was backing Saddam Hussein and using the CIA was just working through the Gulf Arabs who were funding the war that Iraq was carrying out against Iran, and all the Iranians who were killed, the U.S. supplying chemical weapons essentially through the precursor chemicals, the United States supplying the intelligence, telling pinpoint where people were, where the units were, what to attack, all of that. So guess what? Iran retaliated. Iran was not out immediately attacking the West. It was in response to the U.S. attack and support for a variety of terrorism. But yet we continue to paint Iran as this villain when the hard facts are the United States, through its proxy Iraq in the 1980s, continuing on with groups like the MEK, has been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iranians.
Just looking at another piece of news here. Okay, so nothing new. Just confirming JD Vance is not attending the talks, obviously. Just going back to the question, though, of how a war would look like. What do you? I know what Iran's capable of.
Yeah.
I know what they've threatened. I know what the US is capable of, again, based on what we've seen recently, the people I spoke to, and the threats that Trump has made. How would a continuation of war look like? How would the escalation ladder look like? What would the initial targets be? And how could things get out of control? And what would that lead to? I know it's many questions, but it's kind of walking us down of what could happen in the next few days, weeks, and months.
Yeah, as soon so Iran's going to get early warning through its own systems, but also I think through the Chinese and Russians that that the U.S. and Israel are launching. As soon as aircraft are in the air headed towards Iran, I don't think Iran's not going to sit and wait for the first explosion. They will act at that point then against the Gulf states, the UAE in particular, Saudi Arabia. I think the Saudis and UAE are the two primary targets. Qatar and Oman have been more sensible in negotiating with Iran. Israel will be hit immediately, and any of the air bases, any of the outposts in Jordan and Saudi Arabia that are being used to launch U.S. military attacks, they will be hit and hit hard. So, and Iran is now in a position that they've had 2 weeks to prepare. And so within that preparation, they've looked at a variety of target packages. I think they will especially concentrate if the attacks are coming against their power centers, they're going to take out the power centers in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and also probably go after the oil pipeline that extends over to the Red Sea, destroy that.
Would they go immediately to, how would they hold some cards close to heart to see how the US escalates? So what will the US really strike? Who will they target? What will they target before Iran decides how to retaliate? Or could Iran this time around respond very differently and just go guns blazing based on the fact that this is the third time this happens in negotiations?
Yeah, no, you raise a fair point. They may decide to they'll want to get an assessment of how broad the strike is. Now, on paper, and this was circulating, I know Danny Davis heard it from 4 different people in London. So clearly, it's not the plan that the United States put on the table for conducting the attack. It was a massive attack, massive, and so I'm if 4 guys in London know about it, I guarantee you the Iranians know what the plan is, and so if they see that number of aircraft take off, they'll know what's coming, and so they'll know how to respond. So it's.
Can you tell me more about what do you know about that plan? I've heard about it. Daniel told me about it as well. Not sure about the latest reports you've talked about. What do we know? How massive would it be? Because a few of you have echoed these same concerns. A few people I've spoken to. So it's.
So they want to take out all of the power centers. They want to take out the oil refineries, and they want to take out as you said, the bridges. And so they're going to be hitting a lot of civilian infrastructure, and it's going to be, the plan is for wave after wave of aircraft. Now, this goes back to the point you raised earlier about the using up supplies. They don't have an enormous inventory. If I know that the U.S. military planners right now fear that if any U.S. aircraft actually fly over Iranian territory, the risk of them getting shot down is quite high. And the odds that the Iranians will capture a pilot or 2 are quite high. So this is, there's a part of Trump that has been revealed in these recent articles by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times that also show he still has enough sense to recognize that he could get into real deep water. He's already in deeper than he wanted to be. I mean, he had been convinced that this would be a quick in and out like Venezuela. And instead, now we're on week 8 and heading into week 9. So this is consequential. But I'm afraid he's thinking more emotionally instead of rationally. Because you go back and look at the account that was leaked to the New York Times on the decision to go to war, that Trump was advised by General Kane, this is going to be difficult, by Secretary of State Rubio saying what Bibi Netanyahu told you was just horse manure, cleaned it up and changed the animal. And same with J.D. Vance. The only one who was gung-ho, let's go do this, was Pete Hegseth. And, now you see sort of in the Washington, the Washington tango, where they published a story in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago talking about the conflict between the Army chief, the Secretary of the Army, civilian, who is a close bud, a law school buddy of J.D. Vance, and Pete Hegseth. And, so I think the guy's name is Driscoll. So they're in conflict. So whenever you see those stories come out, that tells you, one side or the other is being prepared to be jettisoned. So, but you got all this on that Trump ignored the advice and went ahead and did it. So I'm sure he's getting advice now about, don't do this. We all we're going to do is expand the war. And, the one concern is because, you know how hot it gets there starting in May. It may already be warm. But if you got to a situation where you did not have a reliable power source and air conditioning shut off, Dubai, frankly, is not. Dubai, Qatar, is not livable. I was on the ground in Qatar at Al Udeid Air Force Base back in like May 20th in 2006, and I thought, when I heard that people were coming to that country for vacation, I was going, are they out of their minds? I mean, it's like going to visit a pizza oven that's covered in brown dirt, and they're in the middle of a dust storm, sandstorm kicked up as well.
So the US mainly used precision bombs, so bombs dropped out of the fighter jets and JDAMs in the attacks on Iran more than the missiles. So doesn't that if you count those bombs, you're saying they don't have the. So doesn't that give the US the capacity to continue the war? Yeah. Unless the argument you made that the fighter jets can't really go over Iran after the incident with the F.
No, they'll continue the war. Yeah, they'll continue the war and further run. The more they shoot, the more they're going to deplete the inventories. And again, those inventories in the back of the minds of the military planners, the real target in all of this is China, not Iran. And so, here's China just sitting back laughing. They're watching the United States deplete the inventories that they would want to use in the event of a conflict with China. And the same applies for Russia. Ukraine used to be, at the top of the list of the priority of getting weapons, et cetera. Not anymore, boy. They're off the list.
Yeah, after the shooting of the F-15, do you think the American strategy, if they decide to attack Iran, would change after that incident?
They're going to try to keep him out. My understanding is that one of the things that has happened in the past 2 weeks is a significant and dramatic upgrade in Iran's air defense system.
Okay, there's a statement that just came in. Trump has essentially extended the ceasefire. All right, so I'm going to read out. So this is good news. Statement of Trump. Based on the facts that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Sharif of Pakistan, we have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and, in all other respects, remains ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded, one way or another. Trump.
Yeah. Taco. Trump tacoed again. But, there's no split in the Iranian leadership. That's just a Western fabrication and Western fantasy. Iran has made its position quite clear, what its demands are, those 10 points. They haven't deviated from that. And Trump's insistence that he didn't keep the blockade up, Iran is going to retaliate. There will be a strike against a U.S. ship, most likely. And then that's going to probably force Trump to retaliate in response. But, the U.S. struck first in taking the Iranian ship. So the Iranians aren't going to let that go. But they still control the Strait of Hormuz. And, this, like I said, Iran's not going to launch a preemptive strike. So that's the good news. Now, this dance, I guess they're going to look for some way to allow Trump to save face, where he'll be able to say, "Oh, yeah, the Iranians now have met our demand on X, Y, or Z." But Iran's not going to go back to the table until the blockade is lifted. Period.
That's a good step by Trump. That's a really good. I'm just reading the statement again. He doesn't want the war. I'm really so confident, Larry. He doesn't want the war. Again, I hope I'm right. I know we've had this back and forth. What do you make of him? He's tacoed again. Does that change your analysis in any way in what could happen next? That Trump's statement right now?
No. Well, that tells me that at least some of the people in his cabinet are putting pressure on him not to go back and launch. So, he's not so completely out of touch, but again, the excuse that he's using for this is it's a false premise. So, if you've got to accurately assess what the situation is. Why is Iran doing what Iran is doing? Well, it's doing that because it wants to it wants to secure its freedom. Essentially, they've been held hostage by the United States and by sanctions now for close to 40 years, and it's been especially troubling over the last now 10 years since the signing of the JCPOA. So Iran didn't seek this war; it was thrust upon them. But they're going to fight. They're not going to surrender. And so Trump has got to recognize that. I think, the report is that J.D. Vance came up with a basic proposal that the Iranians were willing to sign off on. Let me read it to you here because it was, I think it was pretty interesting.
It's Tuesday, Taco Tuesday. Perfect timing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, this isn't the first time that he's done that, but here was the, so J.D. Vance was working with the Pakistanis and dealing indirectly with the Iranians, and they had, like last Friday, they had basic agreement that there would be sanctions relief for Iran. Its assets would be unfrozen. It would be able to collect tolls in exchange for a permanent cessation of hostilities. And it would continue enrichment, but under IAEA supervision and with some limits. So those were the outlines of the deal, that the Iranians had basically agreed to that in principle. And then Trump went and imposed the blockade and blew the thing up. So now he's still got the blockade, and we'll find out, the message from Pakistan will be, lift the blockade or Iran's not going to talk.
Do you think he will lift the blockade? I think he will. I really think he will.
I hope he will.
Oil just dropped below $90 again. That's a good indicator.
Well,
that's Trump. And do you agree? That's Trump blinking. He has a blink now.
Well, that's just, again, the oil drops. It has no relevance whatsoever to the reality that's out there. There is 20% of the world's oil supply is gone. It's not being pumped out of the ground now, and it hasn't been for the last 7 weeks. And the other oil-producing countries are not in a position to jack up their production to replace that missing 20%. So that's why with that 20% reduced, it's affecting different effects. Aviation fuel is running very, very short, as is diesel for trucks. Regular gasoline for cars doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. But again, let's just say that they reach agreement tomorrow. Hey, the war is over. You're not going to get that oil flowing back through the system for at least 2 months, minimum 2 months. And some of the systems, depending on how badly damaged they are in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, and Qatar and Kuwait, you could be looking at a much longer timeline. So, that's why this is, this market manipulation, because I'm sure the stock market is now climbing again. Oh, good. Peace is at hand. It's ridiculous.
If the war is back, where will the Gulf stand in this? Will they also just be sitting back? Or could we see the Gulf directly involved if we're dragged back into a war in, let's say, a week or two?
Oh, yeah. No, they're going to be targeted.
They'll be targeted, but will they respond this time around? Because they haven't retaliated directly yet.
How are they going to respond? The Saudis couldn't even beat the Houthis in a 10-year war. None of the Gulf Arabs have any kind of military force worth talking about. There'll just be a speed bump for Iran to run over, and so smartly they've tried to stay out of it. The UAE is the one that's been most reckless in my view.
But the Saudis have they've got F-15s, so they've got, I don't know how many of them, but they've got a whole bunch of F-15 Eagles.
Yeah, good.
They've also got the Eurofighter Typhoons.
What do they have to fire from those F-15 Eagles? Do you think the United States is ponying up additional JASSMs to them? Because the quality of Saudi pilots, it's always suspect, and has been for quite a while. So yeah, they get F-15s. If they dare to fly into Iran, they get shot down.
How capable are the F-15s Eagle? They've got a whole bunch of. They've got 220 to 230. That's a pretty significant air force.
Yeah. Do they have all those pilots trained and equipped? And again, what do they have? What ordnance do they have to drop from them? That's the question.
I think that the munition depletion on the US side is affecting the Gulf, because you already know the Europeans are on a waiting list to receive a lot of what they've ordered and paid for as well. And obviously Ukraine's going to struggle as well. And if the Europeans are waiting, the Gulf going to wait just as long, if not longer.
Yeah. So it'd be one thing if the United States was sitting on just, overflowing warehouses, had abundant inventories, and couldn't move the stuff out fast enough. But that's not the case. It's just the opposite. They're looking at the serious depletion of some critical systems, particularly on the side of the THAADs. Again, I think they're sugarcoating how bad it is, because just the total number of THAAD missiles was something like 900. I mean, for total production, per month, what is it, 90, 108 a year over the last, 10 years. So yeah, and then when you realize each of those could tune $13 million a piece, and you have to fire 2 of them at an inbound target.
Yeah. Why do you think Trump extended the ceasefire rather than either officially lifted the blockade or or unofficially lifted it and allowed Iranian ships? Like, indicate to the Iranians, is that because already he has no choice because the Iranians refused to attend the negotiations? Is that why he had no choice to concede, because the Iran would be very difficult for them to walk back their statement of not attending the negotiations? So is he extending the ceasefire to give him time to maybe discreetly offer some concessions for the Iranians so they go back to the negotiating table? Is that what we saw?
No.
Did we see him trying to play the stick approach and just backfired, and now he's giving himself time to kind of ease up and go back to the carrot?
Well, I don't know, because again, the smart move, if he was sincere about wanting a negotiated settlement, the announcement should have read, I am extending the ceasefire and we are lifting the blockade on Iran in order that we can get together and discuss. If he would have done that, then the entire onus is on Iran. They've got to go to the talks. They now no longer have an excuse to not go. But he didn't do that. No, we're going to keep the blockade in place. Okay, you're going to try to intercept some more ships? My understanding is they've not been intercepting oil. They did go after this one cargo ship, thinking that that China was putting, weapons and military supplies on it, which I think is very, very unlikely, because they recognize something that's critical for missiles or et cetera. That's going to go overland. It'll be either flown in or come by train or truck. So again, this is Trump missing an opportunity.
As a final question, do you agree with the reports that China is supplying significant military equipment to Iran?
Oh, absolutely.
Their defense systems. And do you think they could be encouraging them? Because you're in the belief that China could sustain, with their reserves that they have, they could sustain this war for a long time. Is it possible, if they're supplying them with weapons, they could maybe be encouraging the Iranians not to concede, encouraging the Iranians not to give an inch to Trump, and maybe even force Trump back into the war? Because that would be great news long term for China.
Yeah,
if they could sustain the closure of the Strait of Hormuz economically.
Yeah. Look at as far as the flow of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran will allow that if it's going to China, or if it's going to India, if it's going to a friendly BRICS country. So they will allow that, and you're absolutely correct that this is a way that China can fight the United States, drain the United States of military resources that are frankly not easily replaced, and perhaps in some cases irreplaceable, without having to themselves directly confront and fight the United States. So they've got every incentive to see this linger, and as well as from an economic standpoint. It will damage the United States, damage the petrodollar. It would create more of an incentive for other countries to come and bank with China in China's currency. So, both from a strategic picture, a military picture, an economic picture, it's in China's interest to see this war stretch out, because the United States they've made they've missed every opportunity to try to de-escalate with China. Instead, go back to Scott Besson's comments last week with respect to China. Very aggressive and very threatening. And I think the reaction of some of the Chinese officials are basically, they're pissed off. They said, we're not going to put up with this anymore.
Larry, just before I say bye, what were the comments by Besant on China?
Oh, that they were going to sanction Chinese banks if they accepted any money, any payments, any deposits on behalf of Iran. And the Chinese said, no. That's why, Trump is supposed to, in mid-May, go visit, supposedly have a meeting in China with Xi Jinping. I don't think that's going to happen.
No. Larry, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, man. Always.
Sorry to be Debbie Downer.
Well, at least he tacoed today. That's the good news of the day. Thank you so much, Larry.
Taco Tuesday.
Happy Taco Tuesday. Bye, Larry. For everyone, we're going to be coming on tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to have the Prime Minister of Israel's interview come out. I think the team will put it out tomorrow or today with Ehud Olmert that I did earlier today. And tomorrow we have Ian Bremmer coming on the show. His analysis has been great on the Iran war. We have Luke Groman to talk about the economic impacts of all this. We got Randy Main, Major General Randy Main, who's been on the show to talk about if we're back into a war, how would that look like? Is there appetite either by the Iranians or the US for a return back to the war? And lastly, we have the interview with Alan Eyre, who was part of the JCPOA negotiations. I know you guys enjoyed the discussions with him all the time, and because it kind of gives us an insight into what could be happening behind the scenes and the current negotiations. So I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back tomorrow. And for anyone listening that is not subscribed already, I recommend you do. We do these lives whenever there's important breaking news. We're immediately live with the most important guests on both sides of the aisle, whatever the topic is, both on YouTube and on X. So make sure you're subscribed and get a notification. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.